MC kept training no matter what, and he continued to attend all of the group meetings, interacting with the crew and having a swell time. With 3 days left, he continued his training with Red, who happily gave him more swordsmanship pointers. Then with 2 days left, the clown girl started moving in again and the yandere nearly lost her mind. One day before the start of the test, and Ma had not stopped his daily exercise as he fought and sweated to grow. His sweat hit the floor where he worked and he sweated more as he swung his sword with more precision after many days of practice. The main character was sweating up a storm and his sweat sparkled the more he learnt and improved. Then, Oreo Cookie Hair smiled in satisfaction after a long day of hard work. Finally, the day for the midterm had arrived and all the students gathered around. A subspace gate had been opened and it had a completely different vibe than the subspace for the training grounds. Then our guy was called to come over and he turned to see his group waiting for him, all strong men and women. The main defense from the left was played by the blonde clown grinned as she laughed that the lazy main character who usually preached punctuality was late that day. Their leader Leon, who was stationed in the middle, smiled brightly at the black-haired main character and called him over. Orange hair called weapon was their support from the right and he just waited for our guy to come around. And Chloe, who was their sub-DPS from the left with Blondie, happily greeted the MC this morning. The talented genius was the rearguard at the far right and he apologized for his tardiness. He could not help but marvel at the amazing equipment that they carried, and that the blonde had an S-rank gear Vermilion Phoenix halberd. It did not look like the protagonist had his bombing just yet, and speed weapons gear was a recorder for some reason. The underrated loser could not believe what that idiot was wearing around his neck. To make things worse, the orange delinquent totally saw him looking and started acting like he was itching for a fight. The blonde hyena whispered that it was actually one of the few S-rank equipment that aided with healing, and Ma could not believe that thing was that powerful. A healing S-rank armament was something that was ridiculously hard to get, even if one dumped tens of millions of one in-game. However, its appearance also contributed to its specs. The genius had no choice but to be rather impressed with the weapon and he rubbed his chin in admiration and newfound respect, studying the weapon. However, Orange got rather flustered and told him not to get so close. Then, an attention rang out that the first year midterms of the year 2043 would then commence. Seeing all of the students' faces, they all seemed prepared. They should all be familiar enough with the rules, so the wolf instructor would keep things brief. If there was something that they could not handle, the students were instructed to run away, as they were reminded that they were not yet heroes but cadets in training. They were told not to risk their necks for extra credit. The students smiled as they listened and the teacher also informed them that if they were injured or wished to surrender at any time, then they could contact the instructor in charge. It looked like it was nearly time, so Shiny Boy said that it was time for them to prepare. The glowing golden boy told them not to be nervous and said that they would all do their best. The exam was finally starting and Ma got ready. Then, he noticed the redhead had gone rather silent and he asked her if something was wrong. However, the assassin asked if it was weird that he was now anxious about the test since she remembered that a mermaid could appear on the island. Our guy explained that the instructor said that the teachers had checked everything beforehand, so there was no need to worry. Now then, it was time for the students to step inside the game arena, and the subspace gate was now running. So, the smiling main character told Red that it was time for them to go and he patted her head. The redhead smiled, knowing that she should not worry because the talented genius was with them. She believed strongly in Ma and as their team marched forward, she was sure that everything would be okay. However, suddenly the world went dark and the darkness stretched on long after the team had entered the test arena. A break-in in the darkness was someone calling a name over and over again. There were words being spoken in the dark, flashing in and out in blurry lines, and Red realized that she could hear our guy's voice. He kept calling her name over and over again, until it was louder and louder. Chloe snapped out of her daze and was shocked as the genius asked if she could hear him. Her eyes widened as she realized that she had suddenly lost focus for a moment. Then she stared as the other teammates said that they could not contact the instructor in charge. They had landed in a cave and there was no connection. The crisis had come and someone was bleeding. The redhead was confused, but then she said before them a high-ranked mermaid. Just before the mermaid's appearance, the sky had been bright and beautiful over the beautiful Scopuli Island. There was a lot of coughing and hacking on the beach. For some reason, the team was feeling rather sick after stepping through the subspace. Then, the golden blonde turned to our guy, surprised that he seemed fine, and the talented genius explained that he generally did not get seasick. However, the pretty protagonist doubted that this was a seasickness issue. Suddenly, a merman showed up and it made a very surprised noise. Ma saw a merman for the first time and he was as horrified as he suspected that he would be. The creature was surprisingly smaller than he had suspected. The main character felt like an idiot for being so serious about it and that he might not even have to use his weapon at all. He had been planning to take it easy in the rearguard position anyway. The beautiful golden then said that there would be grown mermen once they reached their assigned area, and those mermen were not like these small ones. First, they had to go check out where the redhead had gone to scout, so that's where the team went. The team strolled through a forest and Leon reminded everyone to be careful while the observant Ma just monitored from the back. Then, he realized something. However, the shiny blonde called out that it seemed like the little assassin was around the area. Little Red zipped through the branches of the trees, using her full assassin powers, and she landed before them. The black-haired main character asked if the little assassin had just been climbing the trees on her way here, and the little Red had said that was the best so that she would not be noticed. Then, the shiny blonde asked Red how things were and what the situation was. The Red had started her report and said that there were about 500 meters ahead, and there was a cave there. The team easily found his cave and they confirmed from Red that it was the right cave. Inside the cave, they saw a gathering of golden eyes and it turned out to be a collection of fish-eyed mermen sitting around a burning fireplace. There seemed to be about 50 or 60 of them in the cave, and our guy noticed that it was definitely something to consider. If they hunted the mermen down, then they would definitely secure first place in the midterms. But for the leader, considering the safety of the team was important too. If it resulted in injuries, then they could be stuck in a cave with no outside communication. The genius wondered if they should take the risk or safe deed or somewhere else. This decision was of course up to their team leader, Leon. The leader counted on Cleo to scout around when they landed on the island. Weapon was to handle the buff type blessings and healing from the back. The cynic still found it interesting that Orange was a healer, and the delinquent had immediately gotten pressed, asking Jeoma what he had said, and yelling that the basics of a hero was to help others and that should be common knowledge. Then, our dude Jeoma was to guard the rear against any potential threats. The lazy student was absolutely grateful for the very sweet and easy job that he was getting. Meanwhile, the golden boy would lead everyone from the center. The team could not just rush in, and of course, the golden leader would join the offense if the situation called for it. Then, the crazy clown pointed out that she had been left out and she asked what she should do. The beaming golden prince beamed at her and told her something. Present day, the leader has made a decision. Rachel was called upon and the vicious blonde pulled forth of her spear. Her hand tightened on her mighty staff, and then she swung and let go, the spear firing like a lightning bolt. It shot off, creating a golden arc in the sky as it flew towards her chosen victim, and their golden eyes stared back. The spear hit dead center in the campfire, completely obliterating it. All the mermen stared shocked and confused as they wondered what on earth had just happened. They were rather slow, but they quickly gathered that they were under attack, and they whipped their big bulbous eyes around to see a muscular figure with really large melons leaping right at them. The mermen were distraught as the figure was terrifying, and she approached with murder in her eyes. Grinning wickedly, the blonde maniac landed in their midst and grabbed her spear, creating a remarkable arc as she spun in the cave, eliminating many mermen in one go. They were too shocked to even process their deaths as their heads went flying. Meanwhile, Jeoma watched her in admiration as he recalled that their brave leader had asked the blonde girl in one of their meetings if she could tear up all of their enemies. Of course, she could do that exceptionally well, and the blonde posed as she grinned back at them, replying in French that of course she could cut down anything. Then, Orange took up his recorder and began to play a note. He blew with all of his might into his glowing green recorder and his blessing immediately activated. The mermen were shocked to hear such amazing tunes firing their way. As the music attacked them from one side, blowing their minds, the hyena lady attacked from the other side, cutting them down like they were paper. As she advanced, she kept counting down her kills with mad glee in her eyes. Crazy blonde counted 18, then 22 kills, and then 24, her joy never diminishing as she swirled and whirled. She beamed with joy, thanking Weapon for his blessing, as she had taken 25 kills down now. Everyone was amazed at her ruthlessness and skill, though the shiny leader just looked proud of her. Then, Red decided to show off as well and grabbed her own weapon. Unsheathing her mighty sword, she activated her own special blessing as pink magic danced off her weapon and body. She used the blessing of the cat. With one mighty slash, she had beheaded a whole line of mermen. She sliced 8 in one blow, and boy did little Red look proud of her kill. More mermen charged at her, and she sliced the ugly creatures up in ribbons of flesh and blood. That made 10. Meanwhile, crazy hyena blonde was pushing 45 while she swirled and whirled her way deeper and deeper into the cave. Now, the boys were kind of concerned as they watched the girls' progress. They were surprised that the girls were not stopping because at this rate they would go too deep into the cave. Then, Jeoma's eyes widened as he realized something. The two girls danced and slashed their ballet of battle as they fought in the cave, not one of them willing to slow down. Red was covered in pink while the hyena girl was encircled by golden magic, and then they both met in the middle to face a giant fish with legs, bigger than any of the other mermen. It almost looked like the girls were fighting each other at some point as they charged towards each other with the giant merman behind them. The beast roared and showed all of its dangerous and sharp teeth, and the two girls activated their powers as they landed before it. Within seconds, the giant monster of death was sliced and its body parts divorced, flying apart and filling the cave with sliced fish. Rachel grinned at Red, noting that the little assassin seemed a little faster than she had been before. Red glared back at the golden hyena and growled that she had been the one to take the big boss down. The blonde laughed and said that the little red assassin was funny as they jumped apart. Our guy was relieved that they were not trying to kill each other, but the girls stayed doing too much. Then, the shiny protagonist took down a few foes on his own, and the MC's attention switched. Leon had noted that the black-haired main character was worried about the two girls, but Jeoma pointed out that it seemed his concern was unnecessary. They had managed to take down all 60 mermen, and they had done it so fast. The shiny protagonist grinned and told Oreo Hair to put a bit more trust in his teammates. Since everything was settled, it was now time for them to leave, and there were grunts of agreement. Decisiveness and leadership, as well as being the solid backbone of the team, made Leon an irreplaceable, an important center of the story. So, the protagonist's existence in the game seemed to be real. So, our guy once again contemplated the question that he had been asked, and he wondered if it had really been just a simple question about where he was from. Jeoma was so distracted that he had not seen the blue light that glinted in the cave. He stood there, knowing that he had not had to contribute much to the fight, so it was a relief when the bright light fired like a laser, coming from over our guy's shoulder and tearing into the protagonist's midsection. Everyone could only stare in shock, confusion and horror at the sudden attack when they had successfully eliminated all enemies. However, that was not exactly so, and now they all looked back to regard the lithe and beautiful enemy that had suddenly appeared. The team cried out their leader's name as he crashed to the ground, but behind them a bigger problem was brewing, and a feminine figure rose to the surface from the water. A beautiful purple demon mermaid had appeared, and she meant business. The blonde hyena panicked, shocked to see a mermaid of all things, and she asked why such a creature had appeared. They had scouted ahead and seen nothing, so the students could not imagine now where that thing could have come from. Jeoma was beyond horrified about the recent development, and he cursed internally, knowing that it had felt like things were going too smoothly. Given the situation, he did not know if they were to fight or run. If they were to poorly attempt to flee with the injured Leon, they might all end up wiped out. In that case, there was another option. Meanwhile, Rachel yelled at Weapon, asking him to try to contact the instructor about a mermaid showing up. However, they were not getting through as there was no connection inside the cave. The students had begun to tremble, and our guy cursed that they no longer had communication from the outside, and his teammates were panicking even more. It seemed the MC was the only one who was still clear-headed, and the blonde was surprised to hear that. Our guy immediately leapt to take charge, telling the recorder guy to pour out his blessing on Leon as soon as possible. Then, Ma called out to Chloe, snapping her out of her daze, and she stuttered out a response. He told her to get out of the cave and to alert the other cadets nearby to evacuate. She was also their escape route, so she had to go call the instructors as she was the only one who could slip away in this situation. Red was alarmed by these instructions, but he insisted that it was hard to flee with the injured protagonist, so the little assassin had to hurry before the mermen began to swarm again. She was hesitant, but she knew her given task was important, so she accepted it. The little redhead leapt away, and then Rachel returned to our guy, asking if he had a plan. Then she paused in horror and asked what he was doing. Even Orange yelled at him that he was insane. However, the crazy genius turned to the mermaid, telling the blonde hyena and the orange healer that he was leaving the small fries to them. They cursed, asking what the crazy genius was planning to do. However, the black-haired main character just closed his eyes. He had always disliked small fish because there was no skill involved in handling them. However, when it came to slicing big fish, he was exceptional at it. With joy, Ma pulled out his knife, for he had big fish to slice. Demons could utilize a unique power similar to humans in their blessings. Magic. The protagonist fell to just one normal attack with said power. This was the difference in strength between humans and demons. Ma could not say for sure that he would reign triumph, despite having the blessing of the sword god. Even in the original game, it was impossible to subdue a magic-utilizing demon without a party. The fact that he was supposed to solo a boss that usually required a full-scale raid was a terrible situation. Of course, he was going to curse when things got so bad so very fast. There was no way for him to back out of this now, and he silently considered his options. It would take around 10 minutes for Chloe to come back, and there was only one thing he could do while facing the mermaid that was smiling like he was fish food. His words and actions also gained an increased sense of authority, and restrictions would be applied to the blessing to adjust to the user's level. The blessing of the sword god was then activated, and our guy grinned as silver overtook his eyes. It had been quite a while since he had done some proper sashimi, and he was quite looking forward to it. The power as usual wished the sword god's blessing upon him. The fight had begun, with the blonde hyena charging forward and attacking the prey in front of her with a mighty fast slash. The fish with big bulbous eyes roared at her and charged. However, she stuck her spear far within its gut and through its gaping mouth, groaning all the while. The talented spearmaster had to fight back 3 mermen at once with her incredible strength, screaming and growling the entire time, as well as cursing as she pushed back the alarmed fish people. She yelled at them to get out of her way, sending a blast of power through them that knocked them back. Then, the blonde sighed with relief and wiped the sweat from her face. The orange-haired kid watched her from afar, considering giving Rachel a blessing boost. But healing the hero Leon was overwhelming enough, as the wound in his side was deep and bleeding. The wound was deep and it was not healing very quickly, but it was recovering regardless, and that was all that they could ask for. The orange record blower was aware that the jerk Ma was absurdly strong from the subspace duel that they had watched. Surely there was a limit when the first-year student was facing a giant malicious mermaid. There was no way our guy was not crazy to be able to stand before that giant fish woman and not run. Just watching them made the ginger feel as if his bones were splintering. It was much too late, but he considered trying to talk some sense into the MC and stopping him from doing something this stupid. However, as the mermaid raised her mighty webbed hand, tinged with magic, and brought it down with malicious intent, Kang Ma's ability activated and he sliced forward with overwhelming speed. He managed to dodge her first attack, bolting right at her with his swords drawn. The mermaid seemed to be a demonoid who primarily utilized long-distance attacks with the magic of water properties. While he did not know magic, the mermaid was still just a fish that happened to have flesh and bones. So, he was going to dive in, leaping at the powerful figure with all of his full chest, and he could cut that giant fish up into pieces. His eyes were whited out with focus, and even the mermaid looked shocked when our guy leapt. The MC sliced with ferocity, slashing through the mermaid, but she somehow dissolved like water, surprising him. He was alarmed when the mermaid suddenly turned her arm into a water drill and charged forward at the orange-haired healer. The poor recorder boy was terrified and frozen in place. He could not even compute moving out of the way. The ferocious fish was elated at the fear that she found in his eyes, and she excitedly rushed at him, but she had distracted herself, and her mouth fell open in a scream of pain. Our guy had zipped over there instantaneously. He was not about to let the mermaid get away with hurting their healer, and he cut her off before she could get to Orange Boy. Ma skidded to a stop as he landed, turning to face his screaming opponent. The cut had been irritatingly too shallow to be good enough, and he leapt off again, this time intending to cut her like he had been trained to cut fish. The mermaid was not having it and leapt back into the water in retreat, much to our dude's hatred and disdain. She truly was a cowardly mermaid, and predicting her movements was no easy task. She was making this entire fight so hard for him. Then, he wondered if she had deliberately gone for the ones who were injured. Regardless, he had to cut her down. Suddenly, someone called to our dude, and he turned in surprise to the recorder boy, who watched him speechless. The hero was also rather speechless as he clutched his wound. The MC sort of remembered they were there, and he asked if they were doing alright. The recorder boy was nervous, but he managed to stutter out that he was fine. Satisfied with that answer, our guy leapt into the fray once more, telling the healer that he was relying on him, and calling him a hero. Weapon was in disbelief as the mermaid leapt out of the water again, and the MC relentlessly attacked her. He had been called hero by Ma, and the boy's eyes widened. He recalled telling the black-haired boy that being a hero was cool. It involved justice and bravery and self-sacrifice and the ability to turn despondence into hope. However, despite entering the world's best hero training school, the orange-haired boy had not seen anyone who had the things that he had mentioned. Our guy had wondered if the healer would confess his love if he found someone like that. The healer said that he had not seen anyone like that in the dragon class anyway, which was why he had joined this group with Rachel, and since he was a supporter type, the team composition worked out well. He had been sure that he could find the hero that he was looking for in Leon. Our guy could not help but smile as he looked at the shiny protagonist, thinking that the healer was right. Weapon caught the MC idolizing too, and he grinned sorry to say, but Ma was far from being a hero in his eyes, although he was strong. Even if he was, the black-haired main character would refuse to be a hero anyway. The orange-haired boy said that being a hero was not some kind of object for him to refuse, and even so, he would not be giving that title to our guy anyway. Now, the recorder boy looked at King Ma in a different light, and Loki cursed at him. The way our dude valiantly fought the giant beast, tearing piece after piece from her in lightning-fast moves. The mermaid even sent projectile purple fish at the MC, and they zoomed at the talented fighter, intending to do great harm. However, he was able to smoothly dodge the attacks, flying over the projectile purple fish, and he mumbled that this felt a bit slow. Then, he realized that the projectile fish were following. Little Miss Mermaid was playing dirty. The dirty fish laughed like an evil villain as she shot more reprehensible attacks his way. But our dude sliced an X shape on the cave wall and broke through to the other side, the fish flying through the wall as well. They shot at him as he ran, chasing him down no matter his speed, and the mermaid grinned wickedly. She used her projectile purple fish to hunt him down. She grinned wickedly and turned her head, intending to send more projectiles towards the others, and the blonde hyena screamed, knowing the evil fish was aiming for their healer. The demonoid mermaid had been aiming there from the start, and she stretched out her hand as she fired a blast at them, and Weapon once more feared that his time had come. However, suddenly our guy zoomed by, slicing her arm right off as the fish still zoomed after him in pursuit. He cursed as he had once again made a shallow cut. He could not take this beast down with only small cuts, and he growled to himself to get himself together. The mermaid was shocked when her arm flew clean off, and then she felt a new level of rage. The magic she had intended to fire got blasted in another direction, and it smashed into the cave walls, tearing a whole beacon out into the island. The mermaid was furious with rage, and she whistled and clicked in annoyance. Suddenly, the 3 fish she had sent Ma blasted right into her, and the large fish was highly alarmed and very confused. Meanwhile, some of the students around the region noticed that their instructor Kim had arrived, and the purple-haired sensei turned. They had also heard a very loud sound that was like a roar as well as a bang. The birds had taken to the air in a suspicious area as well. There had also been a flash of light before the student had seen the instructor, and it had started to rain. All of these were not very good signs, and the teacher got serious as she stared in the direction that the sound had come from. The teacher then smiled at the students and said that they should get to the wounded and move quickly. Seeing that it had started raining, she told the students that they had likely seen lightning and heard thunder. The students immediately accepted this excuse and happily agreed that they should return to the academy as soon as possible, with the purple-haired teacher smiling the entire time. Meanwhile, the rain fell into the hole that had been created in the cave, and the orange-haired student continued playing his tunes to heal the fallen leader. There was silence in the cave, and the fishmen looked alarmed by the sudden hole in their home. They ran and retreated, much to Rachel's surprise. The rain kept flooding into the cave, and the students looked around as their foes seemed vanquished. But they were not about to let down their guard. Our guy groaned mentally about failing to land a fatal blow on the creature because he had to be conscious of Leon the entire time. The mermaid had likely been crushed under the debris after the cave collapsed, and she likely was not dead. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion from the debris to quickly confirm our guy's suspicions, and he grinned in exhaustion, knowing that stupid fish would not die from rocks alone. The mermaid appeared with her melons hanging out, and she looked furious. She looked like she had unlocked new forms of rage as she charged at Ma, and he threw aside his jacket. Then, he called out to Rachel, saying that since the fishmen were basically taken care of, he was leaving Weapon and Leon in her care. The blonde agreed, and the healer looked hesitant. He could not believe it. But King Ma was really going to keep facing the demon head-on. He had thought that the knife-slicing genius had been nothing but a madman earlier, but now, it seemed the orange-haired boy was witnessing a legend in the making. Our guy could finally focus on defeating that big fish, and that big fish alone. He had only 10 seconds left, and he rolled up his sleeves so that he could use his time wisely. It was now time to make up for the lost time. The big fish gritted her teeth and growled at him, and then, once again, she charged at the crazy knife-wielding genius who told her to bring it on. He closed his eyes for a second, and then they snapped open as he zoomed right at her, intending to cut everything down. Faster, faster, and faster, the redhead had to run even faster through the forest. She had no intention of stopping as she raced through the forest. The little red assassin ran, her sword in hand as she slashed through the forest, knocking out every obstacle that appeared in her way. She had run so fast and so hard that it felt like her legs were screaming at her now, begging the redhead for mercy. However, even if she had to use up her blessing to run, even if she could get even a sliver of help, she needed to find any form of help for her fallen comrades. Even so, running hurts. It hurt so bad, and she was not even stopping to catch her breath. However, she would not slow, her thoughts filled with Ma. He had told her to contact the instructors while they had stayed back to fight that impossible beast. The dark-haired guy was the strongest person that he had ever met in her life. However, he always found fighting arduous, and he was the kind to avoid drawing his blade whenever possible. He would only unsheath his difficult weapon when there was no other choice. It was because of this that she ran now. She also believed that the MC had made the best decision when it came to dealing with the situation. But Chloe was still bitter about the mermaid, wishing that she had been stronger. Suddenly, she heard an explosion from the mountain where she had left her comrades, her eyes wide in shock and horror. The redhead turned in horror, wondering what the blast had been. Her lip trembled as she hoped her darling crush was still alive. She raced forward, running even harder and faster, racing through the forest like nobody's business. Her feet skidded across the floor, and she ran even faster. Chloe could not fall here, she could not stop at this limit. The girl ran faster through the rain, even as rain fell from her eyes in despair. She needed to find somebody, anybody who could help, and she cried out, screaming if anyone was there, if anyone could help. Her eyes widened when she finally sensed something. She could not feel it clearly because her senses were a mess, but she could detect mermen ahead of her. Chloe's heart was filled with rage and disgust. Mermen were the last people she wanted to see right now, and she rushed forward with the intent to eliminate them, just to run right into a magnificent sword. Her eyes widened in shock at the sword that deflected hers, and even the blue-haired person who had stopped her was shocked. The redhead was relieved. Finally, she had run into a person. She apologized and then just collapsed on the floor without passing her message. The waterfall-haired girl was surprised and her teammates cursed when they saw that, wondering if they had been attacked in an ambush. They yelled at the redhead, asking if she was insane and that they could not just let it slide and that she tried to hurt them. However, Waterfall Hair told them to hold their charge because the redhead looked familiar. The little assassin managed to weakly crack her lips and speak, telling them about what had happened to Jeonma. The mountain was still smoking in the distance, and the blue-haired girl was horrified. Later, they would wonder if there would ever be a day as astonishing as this. The ginger-haired boy stared in wonder, noting that the MC looked like a skilled swordsman, handling a live fish and flopping on a chopping board with skill. The black-haired boy went beyond just fighting the demonoid. The talented sashimi knife wielder had overwhelmed it. The ginger was certain that the scene that was unfolding in front of them now would be something that would be etched in his memory for the rest of his days. He was witnessing the birth of a true hero. It was not like Jeonma was moving as quickly like he did back at the subspace duel. With his precise and fast technique, he deflected attacks and closed in. The sashimi wielder sliced through his opponent without mercy, darkness thriving within him. His technique originated from the simple act of cutting, and the dark-haired boy sliced through the fish expertly, and its outcome was literally clear-cut. That giant fish fell apart like fallen paper. The two watching could not help but stare in shell-shocked awe. Even Rachel, who was the successors of the Spear clan and grew up among the strong, had not seen anything of this caliber. The blonde was speechless. At this rate, the mermaid might just fall. Suddenly, the blonde noticed something and yelled to weapon. The ginger straightened in shock and the girl barely managed to shove him out of the way as a huge white blast came flying their way. She yelled at the boy to get his mind out of the clouds or they were surely going to die. The ginger was a little surprised about that and then he gaped at the gigantic crater that had been created by the blast that they had just dodged. It was insane. The boy had nearly forgotten where he was from and how surreal the sight was. The surroundings had suddenly changed and their opponent was a demonoid who utilized magic. A blade against magic would not have been a good matchup to begin with, even if he currently had the upper hand. Eventually, Jeonma would start to struggle. The ginger then worried that their opponent used magic that could not be dealt with, and even the dark-haired boy seemed to consider the possibility. However, he still stood in challenge, his knife out as he faced the opponent. The mermaid was still standing despite getting sliced up consistently. She was a huge pain and she thought the same of her opponents. The angry purple fish then attacked them with the needle squall and roared at them. Her attack came flashing at them, along with her slimy bouncing melons as she aimed again to kill. There was a flash of purple in the rain as she faced the MC who stood in her path. Suddenly, there came the collective sound of snapping. The mermaid waved her hand in Jeonma's direction, her teeth gritted with malice, and purple slashes flew right at the young lad as he stood facing the approaching strikes. The young student leapt and raced, moving faster than the incoming attack. The slashes all crashed into the mountainside, narrowly missing him. The sashimi knife that Jeonma held smoke from the attack, a serious frown on his face as he noticed this. The fighter kicked and slashed his attack right back at the creature, slicing through her. The mermaid's eyes widened in shock as Jeonma became larger than life, his look almost demonic as he launched his attack at the quivering fish. The mermaid screamed in alarm and rage, her scream of pain echoing through the mountain cave as yet another slash sliced through her. Suddenly, the boy with Oreo-colored hair had his eyes widened, because suddenly appeared the most rolling, confused pile of mermen coming towards him. The mermaid growled wickedly and then suddenly powered up by tossing something glowing and purple down her gullet. Then, her neck powered up with glowing light like a toad cannon was bubbling in her chest. Then, her jaw unhinged and her mouth became a gaping chasm of purple power, fired directly at the main character. Weapon yelled for him to get out of the way. But the young lad knew that he could not avoid the blast on time. Staring at the blast coming right at him, the scene went white and it felt like he was transported to another world. In that world, the main character stood in a calm sea. He stood confused in the silence, staring out into the open and still world of white and blue. His feet were deep inside the water but the MC was speechless, and he knew not where he was. He caught the water in his hands, staring in confusion when something caught his attention. There was suddenly a flash of pink, like the mermaid's blast was cutting through his very slowly, slicing through the perfect piece of white and blue. Jeonma's eyes widened and he stared out at the horizon, and a voice spoke, telling him to slice. The boy replied that he did it. He had sliced. Little sparks of red flickered within the darkness, and he reached for a sashimi knife, grabbing it tight in his hand. Then, the young lad sliced. The mermaid's shot seemed to slice through the young lad, the rain still pouring heavily in the gaping cave without a roof. The main character could slice and he did, severing the creature's head right from its body. The magic had been severed right at its core and the mermaid's head fell. Blood stained the floor before Jeonma's feet and the mermaid's body lay fallen, drenched and dried up like a fish out of water. The young student stood over the creature's corpse like a dark executioner with his knife in hand. Silently, he regarded his fallen foe as the rain continued to pour. The mermaid struggled to speak, gurgling and glubbing as she did. The other two students immediately tensed, worried that she would launch yet another attack at them. However, suddenly there was spinning and the mermaid's body rolled on the sand, completely dead and defeated. The dried fish's severed upper half rolled, and Weapon's eyes widened as he realized that his newly beloved hero had won the battle. A freshman sashimi knife wielder had defeated a demonoid overpowered creature by himself. The others could not help but feel a little intimidated as they stared at the student's back in awe. Suddenly, there was a splash of blood and the young lad fell to his knees, his hand clutching his chest. The blonde hyena immediately recognized something was going on and she ran immediately to Jeonma. The ginger was relieved that Leon was fine, and then he paused in alarm. This was because the orange-haired boy had noticed that the merman who had run away may have happened to return once more. The lad turned on the alarm but was relieved to see an approaching blue-haired figure. He sighed in relief that it was about time, and before him was Waterfall Hair and her team. one of them carrying the slumped body of the redhead girl. The students were shocked and alarmed to see the diced up fish body before them and the remnant of the team in chaos, with the blonde still struggling to leave Ma. They wondered if they were really looking at the decimated body of a mermaid and why a mermaid was there. Everything had been destroyed to bits, and the blonde hyena pulled the Oreo-haired boy close to her chest as she called out to him desperately. The waterfall-haired girl could not believe the blonde was sticking to the young lad like that. Then, the girl to the group leader who was the blonde, now standing to his feet. Leon laughed nervously and the blue-haired girl assessed that most of the team members looked like they had one foot in the grave, yet the team leader was pristine and spotless. The blonde boy had an absurd amount of luck. The genius swordsman informed the blonde leader that she had made contact with the academy, and the instructors would be with them in an hour at the earliest. Then, the young girl asked just what had happened there. The ginger was speechless at first and then he cursed at their good-for-nothing teachers who were supposed to have explored the darn island beforehand. The genius swords lady already knew the rules and she demanded that they properly explain just what had happened there. Weapon did not take kindly to her words and he asked if the swords lady really had the audacity to be ordering him around right now. Of course, their blue-haired savior snapped and asked why the ginger always had to perceive things so weirdly. This was a request. Just a request, not an order, and she wanted answers. Well, it was not like he would believe what he had to say anyway, but he would answer since she had only just asked. The orange-haired boy grinned as he prepared to explain things since that was his speciality anyway. So, they did explain it and the blue-haired swords lady put all the information that she had heard together. Apparently, a mermaid had appeared out of nowhere during their mission and the dark-haired boy who was now unconscious had defeated it alone. The ginger groaned and said that was exactly what had happened, and he wondered what else she was expecting from his explanation. The blue-haired girl was speechless. A freshman of the academy had killed a demonoid who had appeared out of nowhere on his own. That was a very rare story and was barely believable. The tales that her grandfather had told her when she was younger were even more realistic than that story. However, as ridiculous as that story was, it seemed to actually be the truth. She could not imagine why the survivors of such a terrifying encounter would lie about something like that, giving all of the praise to Ma of all people. It really did sound like a story that came out of a legend. As the descendant of the acclaimed hero, Baylor Joquin, and his disciple, Aaron Niblon, those radiant roots had let her attribute herself to a special class since birth. In other words, she was of a bloodline of masterpieces. Regardless, she had put incredible effort into not being overshadowed by the impressive roots of her impressive family tree, and the young girl had worked hard. That was how she had her talents flourish and how she had gotten this far. However, the young lady now stared ahead as she considered Ma. It was ridiculous how large of a gap there was between their skills and she had mixed feelings of fear, dread, and admiration. Perhaps, she had just been an ordinary person all along when faced with such a brilliant level of talent. She asked her teammate to use her healing blessing on him, and the healer girl immediately agreed to it. A green light enveloped the slumped unconscious boy. Although he was tatted and at death's door, Ma, who was the same age as she was, fought a demonoid alone and emerged victorious. The waterfall-haired girl then stared at the unconscious boy with the slightest looks of contempt etched on her face as she regarded him. The ginger called to her and asked if she really had contacted the academy earlier, and the blue-haired girl confessed that she had. For now, the orange-haired boy thought that it would be better not to tell the instructors what happened in detail after all. The genius swords lady was surprised to hear this and asked why, to which the ginger replied that the teachers had supposedly scouted the island before the mission they had been sent to. If that was the case, as the blue-haired girl agreed that it was, then the ginger had to admit that it was strange. Even though Scopuli Island was large, a demonoid popping out of a cave that could easily be noticed by cadets, such a thing did not add up with the search that should have been done earlier. Even the waterfall-haired girl fell silent as she realized that this was true. It was just a guess, but it made the air heavy and dark with speculation. The blonde boy, Leon, then asked the ginger-called weapon if he thought that there was someone from the demon faction within the academy who would make such a thing happen. There was silence at such a blatant accusation, and then the ginger hurried to say that was not what he meant. However, they could also not rule out that possibility. It was a really chilling speculation, and it was undeniable that this cave was not easy for cadets to miss. Just as Speedweapon had said, if it were not for Ma, Leon's group would have been long torn to shreds by the demonoid. They wondered how such a mistake could have been made by their professors. There definitely were conflicts both large and small in the 7-year truce, but never once did the demons dare to touch the cadets of the Joquin Academy. There was also a clause in the truce stating that such an act could be a justification for war. The talented swordswoman's eyes widened in horror as she realized something horrible. Her dark thoughts were dispelled by a gentle touch on her shoulder, and the ginger said that he knew what she was thinking of, but he gently told her that she was blowing things out of proportion. Of course, it was not a bad thing to be wary of the possibility of a spy within the academy, but it was far too soon to jump to conclusions about things like that. They were not silly conspiracy theorists after all. Leon then pointed out the importance of their stories matching up when the teachers came around. If there was really a spy in the academy, then Ma would definitely become a target once they heard that he defeated a demonoid alone. This was true, and though the ginger did not think it was right to keep this under wraps, considering how much the boy did for them, they had to protect him. If that was how they felt, Abel then suggested that they could all just talk to her grandfather about this first. They were surprised that she had suggested the Sword Emperor, and so some time passed. That evening, all of the students had returned to the academy. A curtain fluttered in the wind at the window of Ma's hospital bed. The poor main character had only just awoken to the sound of the carefree laughter of students. The young lad wondered if he was in a hospital now, and he stared at his hand as if trying to figure out if he had truly survived that encounter. He was truly alive after all, despite the mermaid's best efforts. The wicked creature of purple light had shot something out right before it had died, a magic sphere aimed straight at him. It was not an attack that he could dodge, yet he had been able to see it. Without thinking, the genius with the sashimi knife had been able to cut through it like a like, and the magic was severed into 2 halves before bursting. It had definitely been water, the magic had been water. However, the boy struggled to figure out what that sensation had been. After he had activated the sword god's blessings, he had felt things that he could not possibly describe. Then, Ma recalled his blessing that had used to feel more like a curse. Just then, his status window popped up and he had leveled up a bit on certain strengths. His mental fortitude, for instance, had increased by 1. He did not get scared when facing the mermaid, so he guessed that was the reason why, and the effects were nice. Finally, the young black-haired boy reached out and noted that the assimilation rate of his power had gone up to 7.2%. He began to wonder if this had unlocked when he drew his knife while fighting the monster. The line on the mermaid's magic had been sliced too, and he wondered if that contributed, oblivious to the bespectacled figure that had opened the door to his hospital room. It popped in the clingy head, who grabbed him in a happy hug. Crying out in relief, she said that she had been worried that something horrible happened, and she wailed, swearing that she was going to pop every single one of the useless instructors who had supposedly explored the area. She was so relieved that he was unhurt. The boy begged for the director to let up, and she sulked that she was happy to see him awake. She had nearly forgotten that she brought something with her, and she quickly searched around in her purse for the item, sure that she had put it near the opening. The black-haired boy wondered if it was a dimensional pocket, and then the director crowed with success as she had found what she had been looking for. She pulled it out with joy, saying that the young lad had earned the midterm reward, the Murasame blade. Ma stared at the blade in awe. It was a B-rank sword, a Japanese sword that meant rain shower, and it was said to possess an edge that glistened like dew. It was a level 25 sword with a really high attack level. The director really hoped that the young lad liked it. Then she apologized for giving this sword to him in a place like this, as he should have gotten it officially. The boy was just happy to get the sword, and then the principal detected someone sneaking around at the back. She yelled at the old geezer, asking what he was suddenly being so shy for, and the young lad looked up in surprise as she yelled for the old man to come in. The old man stepped in, scolding Medea for calling him an old geezer even though he had asked her not to do that. He cleared his throat, and the director scoffed that he would not let her act like a young girl. It was a strange sense of deja vu for Ma, as the last time he had used his powers excessively, those two had also been there. Once again, the director of the academy and the Sword Emperor were at his hospital bed, and he asked what had brought them there. The director explained that she had heard everything from his teammates, and that on behalf of the Jokwon Academy, she would like to apologize from the bottom of her heart. The beautiful lady bowed in apology, and even the old man lowered his head a little in shame, much to the young lad's alarm. The academy was to blame for everything that had happened during the midterms. Because of that, he and his teammates, no, everyone who was there, had nearly lost their lives. The Oreo-haired boy was shocked to hear as the director, Medea Poison, swore on her honor as the director of Jokwon Academy to uncover the truth behind this incident. The old man acknowledged that the young lad had saved the cadets, and for a moment the boy was speechless. Then, he just mumbled that he had only done what he could. The director was amused and said that while his actions were nothing short of remarkable, they needed to keep the incident under wraps until they had found out the full truth. She was ashamed to say this as the director of the academy, but the mastermind behind this event was within the academy. She was really sorry to Ma, and she knew that doing this would not be enough, but the young boy smiled and said that he understood perfectly. The director smiled in amazement, saying that the young lad should act like a kid sometimes and throw a tantrum or two as he had earned. The boy sometimes acted like an old man trapped in a teenager's body, which was not far from the truth. Later, the old man and the director left the room, leaving the young talented genius alone. The two walked in silence with a grim look on their faces as they considered the implications behind the recent attack. The director was the first to stop. She called her senior, calling him Sieg, and asked if he could remember the day that they had met for the first time after enrolling in the academy. Back then, the old man had been lying on a bench in the field, and she had told him to shove it. In response, the old man had drawn his sword without a word. What was it that he had said? Something along the lines of telling her not to order him around, with typical 8th grader syndrome. The old man mumbled that he did not remember such an embarrassing memory. The lady smiled in amusement with the slightest of sadness coloring her eyes. It felt as if that encounter had happened just yesterday, yet she had already spent 60 years at the academy. Goodness, she really had lived long. Yet, it was laughable how she had not even filled a tenth of the Jokwon Academy's history. Back when they had enrolled, this place, the academy, was already ancient and filled to the brim with history. While there had been big and small incidents, the academy nurtured and protected its cadets for 700 years. Yet, Medea colored green with rage, her hair dancing in her aura, and the glass of the window before them shattered. A protective shield protected them from the raining shards as she closed her eyes in concentration. However, the director still could barely hold back her anger, triggered by what had occurred to the students under their protection. Before the midterms had started, she had received reports that they had completed multiple preliminary surveys of the island. Even if it was rare, the Scopuli Island was known as a ground for mermaid sightings, so she had taken every precaution when it came to ensuring the students' safety. However, things had still ended up like this. Noticing her turmoil, the old man reached out and gently touched her shoulder as he called to her. The director smiled, apologizing for getting lost in thought, and the old man stared, knowing that her smile was fake. Then, the director switched personalities and cooed, saying that the young dark-haired student was so amazing though. He had taken down that mermaid all by himself, and she was very impressed by that, while the old man cursed and called her a dang old lady. The director cooed and asked the man what he thought of the young student, and the old man was speechless. In truth, the boy was a natural-born talent. They had seen countless names hailed as the chosen ones of their era, only for them to lose their light like a meteor, a temporary brilliance. In families of heroes desperate for glory and honor, the word genius was often recklessly thrown around when a child showed the slightest bit of aberrance or promise. It was a word that he had forbidden the use of, even for his precious granddaughter Abel. However, if it was the boy with a talent so unfathomable that he had decimated a mermaid solo, then the word genius could only apply to that boy. If Ma eventually accumulated experience, the old man could not help but wonder just how far he would go. If it was Kang Ma, the old man wondered if he could reach the place that he had dreamed of. The old man began to walk ahead, much much to the director's surprise, but he just told her to stay put at the academy for now. The director smiled at his encouragement, and she agreed but reminded him that he was going to help her clean stuff up. He mumbled that he did not recall such things, and she rudely asked if he had suddenly gone senile. However, he insisted that he did not remember. Meanwhile, back in Wolf class, Ma went over all that he knew so far. The fact that he had severed the demonoid's head back on Scopuli Island seemed to have been kept under wraps, as per the headmaster's instructions. It was a bit awkward to say this, but it might be that his classmates were so carefree, because he had stopped the mermaid. After his discharge, the first thing he had done was visit the school's forge to reshape and enhance Murasame. In truth, the sacred sword was just a metal rod to him, considering the sword god's blessing, so the reforging was necessary. The young student had asked for an enhancement of his weapon and his request was confirmed, since he had come during the 700th anniversary event. The blacksmith would not even charge him and he asked the boy to return in a week. The blacksmith Vollander was brimming with enthusiasm, and the student had gotten lucky. He thanked the smith, and now he could only hope for a successful enhancement. Suddenly, someone called to him and he turned in surprise to see his obvious #1 fan. Chloe was elated to see that he had been discharged and she happily asked how he was feeling now. She hopped over with a crutch and he asked her how she was doing. The redhead laughed and showed her broken leg, explaining that things had ended up like this, and thanks to the emergency treatment from Speed Weapon. Though she could not really remember his name, the doctors said that she would be able to walk without crutches in a week. That was news worth celebrating and the little assassin was pleased. She was also an auditor after all, so of course her body was built different. Then, she giggled and apologized for getting a little too excited. And the dark-haired boy was also glad to see that she was doing better. Even if it was true that he alone had taken down the mermaid, it had not been through his efforts alone. The boy asked if there had been anything unusual, and the assassin confessed to having heard that the director and the elders were at odds. Everyone had done their part in getting them out of that sticky situation. Chloe's rescue call, Rachel's merman clearing, and Speed's healing and blessing had helped tremendously during the fight. They could not say that Leon had contributed much as he had successfully gotten incapacitated before the fight had even begun. He had barely commanded or directed the way the fight would go either. Now, Ma was concerned and wondered how the blonde was even going to defeat the Demon King with that kind of attitude, as being that useless in a serious battle was a one-way ticket to the netherworld. He then wondered if the blonde had been so useless since he had gotten injured first. Suddenly, someone appeared at the door of class and yelled at everyone to stop what they were doing. Their wolf class teacher was back and he yelled for everyone to be quiet and to sit down. There were a few very important announcements to be made before the training assembly. This might be sudden, but for the time being in their class, there would be someone co-instructing with him. He cleared his throat and then prepared to introduce them. The students were surprised to get a co-instructor out of the blue, and some of them even found the situation rather annoying. In walked the Sword Emperor himself in all of his white and pristine glory. The room was shocked to see him stride in, with a serious expression on his face. The students were alarmed, wondering why the Sword Emperor had come to their class, and they thought that the whole situation was so cool. Then, the man with golden eyes then looked up and the black-haired boy was stunned, wondering just why the old geezer was there. Later that night, inside of a room with a square window, a grown man was getting knocked around. The man begged, saying that he was sorry when a small hand grabbed the chin of the bleeding man. The lady with white hair then punched the man again, sending him flying. The man begged the instructor Kim that he was really sorry. However, the white-haired instructor covered in purple huffed at the elder. She huffed with eyes glowing purple, saying that the 5th Corps commander was enraged. 2 fingers pulled forth a curved green and red item. It was one of the teachers in the academy, and she raised the curved item to her lips, saying that her subordinate should have cooperated when they had the chance. They really had a knack for annoying people, and when the man tried to beg, he was beaten harshly. The teacher then bent and asked the man if he could repeat himself again, as she found him very annoying. The man coughed and spat blood and the pink-haired lady sighed. She nibbled on her little treat, mumbling to herself and asking if it had really been that difficult to bring Leon back half dead. Even if he was a hero candidate, they still could not get it done despite taking a mermaid along with them. The mermaid had indeed been targeting the blonde hero after all, and the pink-haired lady was pissed. Thanks to her henchman messing up the job, the blonde was now comfortable at the academy. The man once again tried to apologize but ended up spitting up even more blood. The pink-haired lady snorted and kicked the poor man again, saying that he clearly did not take her seriously. The man cursed and swore, his hand to his face as he cursed and hated. He thought that the mere instructor had a lot of nerve to treat him this way and walk all over his face. The instructor was greatly disgusted and complained about the dude getting blood on her shoes. She sighed that the whole situation was ridiculous and frankly, it annoyed her. She could not believe that a mermaid of all things had gotten taken down by a bunch of first-year students. The situation was completely unbelievable. Then again, looking at the new students this year, the instructor would not be surprised if they could indeed do anything. The messed up man tried to speak, saying that apparently, the whole beatdown had been done by just one cadet, which made the instructor pause. The pink-haired lady of course suspected Leon. However, the man coughed and said it was not the blonde at all. She could not stand the suspense, so she demanded that her subordinate just spit out his suspicions. The man confessed that the person who took down the mermaid was actually the year's top student, Kang Jeong-ma. The pink-haired lady was surprised to hear that the special admission student had somehow beaten a whole mermaid. She did not even look like she believed it. However, if that was the situation, then she was powered up. The evil instructor licked her lips, saying that she found the situation quite exciting. Meanwhile, back at the school, most of the students were living normal lives and doing their counting as usual. It was of course the daily run of the low-ranked students, and they chased after their brutish instructor who yelled that he could not hear their counting. They yelled even louder as they ran after him, shouting out their numbers louder and louder. As the students trained, a lone figure sat and watched with a crutch by their side. It was the redhead who sat with a happy smile as she waved at all her suffering classmates. Jeong-ma could not help but look at the girl in jealousy as he would give an arm and a leg to skip physical training class. It was so brutal. The teacher happened to catch him slacking off and yelled at him to go faster and that he was too slow, so the boy panicked and picked up the pace. It was not only their guerrilla instructor with them but the famous sword master as well, and he asked if the poor boy was still hurt from the incident in the midterms. The boy yelled that he was not hurt, and he wondered why the heck someone this important was running along beside him. The Sword Emperor, Siegfried von Nibelung, was a descendant of the first Sword Saint, the right hand of Balor, Joquin, and the Sword Saint, Aaron Nibelung. Siegfried was the man who would later inherit the title of the Sword Saint, a title that was as unique to him as his own name. The Sword Saint would become one of the greatest forces of humanity, and not only that, but during the Second Demon War, he would also become Leon's swordsmanship master. The old man was a character whose importance rapidly increases in the later half of the story. So, the poor background character could not understand why someone that important was now keeping tabs on him when his only desire was to stay in the shadows and out of the plot. He wished the old man would just go back to watching over Leon. The main story, which was gradually going off track, was now completely falling apart. As the Oreo-haired boy thought about it, he realized that the blonde never actually ended up receiving the Sword Saint title. It was a pretty big issue back then. Well, since the hero of the story could not inherit the title anyway, the MC figured that maybe it did not matter in the long run if the story did go a little off track. Barely a minute went by before he took back his words and immediately decided that being hounded by the Sword Emperor was still way too uncomfortable. Glancing at the Sword Emperor, an old man who was running beside them and still making them eat dust, the main character then realized that the old man's form was actually poster-worthy. The man looked so good that his other classmates were impressed too. It was as if they were running together with the man matching his pace. The old man told the young lad that the foundation of any warrior came from physical strength and endurance. No matter how outstanding a talent may be, it was useless if the body could not support it. Conditioning was the foundation which enabled further growth. The old man yelled for the young lad to not cut corners and to keep up. The boy agreed and raced after the old man as fast as he could. And the old man yelled that he could not hear the boy's response. The boy yelled that he definitely understood. The old man was thrilled and smiled, happy with the boy's response. Then, he somehow raced ahead even more and demanded that the young lad keep up with him. There was no way for Kangen to possibly accomplish that. The boy was barely keeping up with his classmates that had started to give him a considerable gap as they ran. Jianma was so confused and wondered if the old man was somehow aging backwards because he had so much strength. From now on, unless it was for field training, the use of personal weapons was strictly prohibited. Suddenly, a sack was shaken out and a bunch of rusty, dusty weapons got shaken out of it. Instead of personal weapons, the students were then asked to pick up one of the weapons in front of them and to master it. The young prodigy was surprised to see that even a sashimi knife had been included in the weapons that the old man had pulled forth. The other students thought that this was rather out of the blue, and one of the students wondered if his weapon was a family heirloom. Then, a student had a question for the Sword Emperor and the man was interested in hearing it. The boy asked if, in the long term, he believed that it would be best to get used to the weapons passed down from their families, and he wanted to know why that was being prohibited. The old man said that it was a good question. It was because the basics were more important than everything else. The more the students relied on high-grade weapons, the more likely they were going to neglect their training. It was easy to mistake the power of a weapon for one's own strength, and that would eventually lead to the very weak user of a very powerful weapon. In that case, it was actually even more important to learn how to use them and make up for any shortcomings. One of the guys grunted that the boy who kept raising his hand was just making a fuss to get attention. However, the old man said that no matter how well armed they were, if their skills were lacking then their weapon would end up being a pearl necklace on a pig's neck. Also, the old man glared with a serious gleam in his eyes as he added that a true master would never blame his equipment. And that was the end of the story. Everyone was very moved by that intense answer and our guy recognized those words as the saying of his first teacher. The Oreo-haired kid nodded with respect at the Sword Emperor's words, saying that it was 100% true. So, the man slammed the end of his cane on the ground and said that once they had mastered the basics, they would naturally become comfortable with any weapon. That being said, cadets who could handle ordinary weapons skillfully also had a high possibility of receiving a higher score in the class promotion evaluation at the end of the year. This really excited the other students and they rushed forward, eager to claim a weapon and begin their training immediately. Even Jianma was kind of impressed at how the old man had a really powerful way with words. All of the students had become very inspired. The boy had already thought of the old man as just Media's punching bag, which was kind of mean. Then, the young lad noticed the knife on the floor. He had known that this would happen and he was a little nervous. The boy decided that he would just grab what he needed, and the old man focused on him at once. It was just as the talented youth had expected of the old geezer. Today, all the students were expected to get accustomed to their new weapons, and then they would implement pairing training between cadets which would involve one-on-one matches. The students were surprised that they would be engaging in such matches without the subspace, and they worried that they would surely get hurt. The old man reminded the cowards that they had enrolled into the academy to grow into warriors worthy of carrying on the legacy of the ancestral hero. A warrior could only truly grow through combat while facing the risk of being defeated. However, if the students pointed their weapons at each other without thinking, then they could easily end up killing each other without even meaning to. So, before pairing, the Sword Emperor planned to personally give them a demonstration of proper sparring. The students were excited that they would get the opportunity to see the Sword Emperor's sword skills live and direct. Another student was excited because they had only watched the display on internet videos. Their brutish teacher then reminded them that he was still there and he told them to be quiet, and there was to be no talking during lessons. Li Wenbin was an educator at the world's top academy for magical students, and in his entire career, his whole life, this had to be the biggest and worst crisis he had ever faced. Even if it was just a demonstration, the poor instructor was somehow expected to face off against the Sword Emperor. Internally, the poor instructor apologized to his mother as it seemed like this was the end of the road for him. The teacher tried to speak up to the Sword Emperor, but a hand raised to stop him. It turned out that the famous Siegfried had his eyes turned to another and he called to a cadet. The Sword Emperor called on Cadet Kang Jianma who looked horrified that he had been called at all. The poor student was then asked to come forward while the old man looked at him with a glare of intensity. The cadet Kang Jeong-ma found himself suddenly called forward by the Sword Emperor, and the talented old man drew his weapon. The other students were alarmed and shocked, thinking that the piece of junk sword wielded by the mighty Sword Emperor did look significantly sharp and intimidating. More importantly, they were about to be witnesses of a demonstration from the Sword Emperor himself. Then again, the other students also wondered why the Sword Emperor was challenging a noob. He even called the boy personally by his name and everything. They did not think their classmate was all that, and the classmate in question could hear all of the jerky things they were saying. It was not like Oreo Hair wanted to be in that position either, but the old man did not care and just asked the boy if his bones were healed, as he planned on re-breaking them. The boy admitted that his bones were indeed healed, and that he was fine. That was exactly what the old man wanted to hear because he immediately got fired up. If that was the case, then he demanded that the young student immediately pick up his sword. Even though this was supposed to be a sparring match, the MC felt that situation was just too much. His condition was perfect after a long rest, but there was no reason a student should be fighting the Sword Emperor Siegfried as his opponent. Our guy was sure that if he crossed swords with the old man, it was clear that it would not end easily, and he was kind of nervous about that. At least one of them would lose a hand, and if they were extra unlucky, a head would roll. The boy wondered if it was because of the divine power, and victory was spelt shakily in the waters of his mind. Even if he did not want to, his instincts were craving for a fight. However, this situation was far too different from the usual. If he thought about the consequences of this matter, the boy openly admitted that he was nothing compared to the skills and experience of the Sword Emperor. The young man asked for the old man to please lower his sword. The other students behind him snickered and laughed, saying that of course, he would say that. They knew that their classmate would get beaten like a dog, and they mocked him openly as the boy silently hung his head. However, Jeong-ma's eyes told a different story, and they shone with a sharp challenge. The old man was not moved by the young student's pleas, and instead seemed enraged by his behavior, asking if the boy had no pride as a swordsman. The old man glared and asked how long the boy thought he could live while hiding his power, and he demanded what was the use of the extraordinary talent that the boy had been given if he chose to remain a coward for the rest of his life. His words really stung, and they resonated in the young boy as he considered the word pride. It was the word that he had engraved in his heart ever since he had claimed the title of the greatest swordsman in the country in his past life. Those two characters that spelled out the word pride were the reason that the boy had never put down his sword and had spent most of his past life cutting fish as he had been shown to do. The provocation from the Sword Emperor was trying to test him, and even the instructor Lee looked concerned. The elite students were also watching. If Kang Jeong-ma were to fall for that provocation in this situation, then he would definitely regret it for a long time. The boy was sure of that. However, his grip still tightened on the knife he held. The instructor rushed forward, wanting to help the student out, but the old man raised his hand to stop the instructor Lee. The Sword Emperor could already tell that the young boy had already made up his mind. Cadet Jeong-ma. Everyone watched with bated breath as the boy's name was called once again, and the MC got a serious expression on his face as he finally decided to learn from the Sword Emperor. The main character raised his sashimi knife with the intention to do battle, and the blessing of the sword god manifested over him. There was darkness, the air tense as the two swordsmen stood before each other, the atmosphere thick with the scent of challenge. The two stood face to face, sword raised and sashimi knife poised at the ready as both men sized up the opponents that stood before them. On one side stood Jeong-ma, a stripe of white in his dark mop of hair as he faced his opponent with a serious expression on his face. The old man thought that it was as expected, and his own sword was raised to meet the challenge. The man's golden eyes gleamed as he assessed his opponent. Even though he was 70 years old, the Sword Emperor could still remember a moment that vividly came to mind. The enlightenment that he had gained through the sword. Back then, the Sword Emperor had not been mature yet. He had met a one-armed wandering knight. The knight had gripped the smaller boy's hands in his one giant grip. That wandering swordsman, the knight, had then shown the young boy the power that could be wielded when one swung a sword with the grace and the might of a warrior. That knight back then had undoubtedly been at the level of that realm, and the young boy had watched the knight in awe. The boy that he had been keeping an eye on since the allocation test, Kang Jeong-ma, now stood before him. The old man was sure that if it was that boy, then likely the young sashimi knife warrior would be the clue that would lead the Sword Emperor to that realm. Excited, determined, and ready, the old man raised his mighty sword and prepared to strike. In a flash, the Oreo-haired student moved, almost faster than the old man could detect, cutting with intensity and speed. The old man's gaze remained steady and his golden eyes shone. He swung his sword as fast as the boy was moving, and the youth only managed to dodge the next slice. The old man then turned with alarm, but was also very impressed that the boy was dodging his strikes. Meanwhile, the dark-haired boy was already spinning back and ready to throw in the next combo of attacks. The main character flew at the Sword Emperor, who watched him approach with something akin to a gleam shining in the old man's eyes. Their dance was a dangerous and wild mix of sharpened metal sliding against each other as they were narrowly escaping each attack. The old man was impressed at the boy's boldness to charge head-on without even attempting to avoid his next attack. It was a peculiar sword path, and the Sword Emperor thought it was much like that of a swallow in flight. The dance continued, flashes of blue and green clashing against each other as they both spun and bobbed and weaved, facing each other head-on as the sparring match continued. They were almost evenly matched, which was a feat to accomplish on its own, and the match went on, both fighting and working hard to match the other's hot and spicy pace. The old man was impressed by the young lad's physical abilities, noting that even those had improved compared to the past. The youth could somehow push him back so effortlessly, it was amazing. However, the Sword Emperor's gleaming and bright sword was raised high with the intent to strike, and it was not the kind of firepower to be taken lightly. The Sword Emperor swung his sword, a bright burst of light emanating from that powerful swing. It was so sharp and swift that it would have surely blinded a weaker opponent, and Jeong-ma felt the swing coming from a mile away. It was an earth-shattering and powerful strike. Meanwhile, the other students watched the fight intensely, studying the battle that happened before them, and one of them could not help but remark internally that he did not understand. The student sulked, thinking that the MC had just gotten lucky with the matchup during the last subspace sparring. The boy was just from an ordinary class, at best, The weak student was the only decent cadet among the special students. However, it was not supposed to matter that he was decent since the sulking student expected all special students to be weak. So, the student could not understand why the great and famous Sword Emperor cared so much about that one special student. The student watched and scowled, and before the fight began, he hoped that the Sword Emperor would give the Oreo-haired student a proper lesson so that they could see the weak student cry like a baby. Then the students watched as the fight began, and for a moment they were all speechless. The sulking student was confused the longer he stared at them, and the more he stared, the more he thought that both opponents were just standing still, neither of them moving to attack, and he wondered why this was. Meanwhile, Instructor Lee could see everything, and he watched in shock, knowing that the two opponents were in fact not standing still at all. The instructor had doubted the Sword Emperor's words at first, but he was genuinely shocked to see that Kang Jeonma was truly exceeding expectations, as they had not expected the young boy to be at such a high level. The instructor had earlier expressed his worry to the Sword Emperor, saying that the headmaster would not like the idea of the old man sparring students, plus the cadets around him could be affected too. However, the old man had just responded, asking the instructor if he really thought that the man would actually cross a real sword with the young boy. The old man assured the teacher, saying that if his thoughts were correct, then Kang Jeonma would be able to step into that place and face him man to man. The instructor was surprised to hear this and asked if the old man truly meant the mental realm. It was supposed to be a huge feat for any student to possibly grow enough to reach such a state, especially a first year. Yet, the young boy had actually managed to enter that place and even withstand the strikes that the old man threw at him. The Sword Emperor himself could not help but be astonished at the talent and skill displayed by the youth he challenged. A duel in the mental realm was an intense battle of wits, and one could tell just by crossing swords. The young boy with the dark hair, even in this short time, he was growing, and he was growing strong. The lazy student held his sashimi knife high, with no hesitation in each mental step he took. The boy's posture was strong and his stance flooded with determination. The old man could not help the happy gleam in his eyes and the smirk on his lips as he regarded the boy's impressive form. If that was the case, then the old man raised his weapon, and it was charged with power, bright and intense. The sword that he held would have to rise to meet the young boy's challenge, and it sparked to life with light and energy. The Sword Emperor asked the young boy to take this, and he sent a huge energy wave right at the young boy, and the students felt the charge even from where they stayed, watching in awe. The instructor was alarmed and knew that the blue light was aura. The students stared in shock, and the instructor worried if the two had broken through the mental realm and returned to reality. The old man grinned with his eyes gleaming in glee, and the young boy faced him in challenge with a dark determination in his eyes. This was nothing like what the Sword Emperor had said it would be, and the instructor wished they would stop as soon as possible. The instructor Lee had to stop this before it continued and escalated into something wild, or they would end up seeing bloodshed on the school grounds. There were sparks as both fighters took off and leapt at each other, and the teacher yelled out to the Sword Emperor, begging him to stop. However, someone suddenly showed up, and she yelled that the Sword Emperor was crazy. It was the director, and she had popped out of nowhere with a sharp burst of energy, snapping the two fighters out of their intense challenge, and the lady screamed in rage, asking what the crazy old man was doing to his student, and then asking if he had lost his mind. The talented Sword Emperor could not help but apologize to the school director, who was fuming by the way. She growled and asked what he was saying, so the Sword Emperor quickly corrected himself. He admitted that apologizing was not right, which further stupefied the irritated director. She glared at him, her eyes blazing red with much annoyance and disappointment at his shameless, reckless behavior with a student. Grabbing him by the collar, she yelled and asked if the old man was in his right mind at all. If he was senile, then it was best for everyone if he just stayed home and rotted. The talented director had worked so very hard to get the old man a spot, and then he pulled a very dangerous stunt with a student. At this point, she was convinced that he was out of his mind. She also asked if he wanted to die. The students had whispered and murmured when the director had shown up to stop the fight, and she was hesitant about causing a scene. The old man admitted that he had not intended to do anything dangerous, and she cursed in frustration at the situation they had found themselves in. Meanwhile, the old man glanced back at the young main character, who was busy sheathing his sashimi knife. The Sword Emperor had actually gone a little further than he had expected to, and he had ended up losing self-control. Without noticing, he had ended up exerting his aura to the fullest in a battle against a student of all things. The director was still yelling out rude insults and asked the talented old man if he was deaf. He groaned and called her by name. Then, he turned to Media and sincerely apologized for stressing her out so much. The director had not expected that, and she was truly surprised by the apology. In over 50 years, the beautiful lady had never heard an apology fall from the old man's lips, and he said it that day once but twice. It was unnerving. So, the director then asked why the Sword Emperor had engaged in something so foolish earlier that day. He had unleashed the Sword Spirit's blessing on a student, and if it were not for her, something terrible would have surely happened. The old man sighed and admitted that if he had not unleashed the blessing, then he would not have been able to gain the upper hand in the fight. This information shocked the director, and she gaped, unable to believe what she had just heard. Her old friend Siegfried had so much pride, and yet he had so easily admitted to near defeat in a battle against a student of all things. She knew well about the innate talent of Kang Jeonma, but she also knew better than anyone just how strong the Sword Emperor truly was. Someone like that admitting defeat was no small thing. The old man confirmed her suspicions by informing her that the young boy had already reached the mental realm, which was where they had held their battle. The director was shocked that such a thing had already happened. Not even the super talented old man had started mastering the mental realm until he was nearly 30 years old, and here he was saying that a 17-year-old had already done it. It did not make any sense to her. The old man sighed and admitted that he did not really understand either, but if there was something that could offset experience, then it was definitely talent. The smoke from his cup bubbled up in the tense air, and the director groaned with her hand to her face. Kang Jeonma was turning out to be way more trouble than she had anticipated that he would be. She recalled rushing to him after stopping the fight to ask the student if he was alright. But the boy was surrounded by a deadly aura as he was still getting out of the mental realm. The director had stopped in her tracks, and in that moment, any semblance of dignity as an educator or a 7-star vanished from her. The emotion she had felt towards that boy at that moment had been pure unadulterated fear. It was a feeling quite similar to the one that she had when she first met the 6th Division commander called Vasan. He had been a towering, terrifying being, and she wondered why she would feel such a thing now when facing a student. The director wondered if this was because the boy's name had the word devil in it. She was deep in thought, her hands partly knocking her glasses off her face as she considered the situation. However, studying her old friend, he seemed deep in thought as well, and it did not seem like anything he had told her was a lie. Then, she asked the old man if this meant that he had lost the fight in the mental realm. The old man was so offended by her words that he suddenly started yelling that there was no way. Even if the boy's talent was innate, it was still nothing to compare to a sword emperor who had trained and harnessed his skills for years. On top of that, the old man insisted that he was not even fully armed at the time, so the boy had not fought him at his full strength. The director was amused by this reaction and asked why her friend was busy overreacting. Besides, the one who always said that masters did not blame their equipment was him, so he was making all that noise for no reason. She grinned and asked if he was using his equipment as an excuse, adding that it made him look a bit ridiculous to do that. The old man trembled and twitched in rage and wounded pride, insulting the director where she sat on her haughty chair. The director was able to match his energy and cursed right back, asking her old friend if he wanted to die. Then they both launched into a nice friendly cursing match between the two of them. Meanwhile, somewhere else, two people sparred against each other. There was a huge flash of light and a rending of the waters and the earth as their weapons met in a huge clash. One figure was the grinning old man, wrapped in the thrill as he did battle with the other figure, which was of course Kang Jeong-ma. Suddenly, a notification bell went off and Jeong-ma's eyes snapped open. The boy had been awoken from a dream and he stared at the roof, dumbfounded and silent. The fight between the two warriors had ended well, but now that he thought about it, he found the Sword Emperor to be quite hot-headed. If Medea had not intervened, things could have gotten really dangerous for him and the other students. The boy with the Oreo-streaked hair rolled to his side as he pondered his new situation. As he recalled bits and pieces of the fight, the young gloomy lad recalled that he had somehow entered the mental realm. It was strange to actually experience it instead of just playing it as a gamer. The mental realm is an active space that could be activated by the mastery and understanding of one's weapon. It required certain conditions to be met, of course, and only peak masters who had honed a single weapon their entire lives could enter it. Due to this, even in the world miracles blessing him, not even 10 heroes could freely enter the mental realm. Leon, the protagonist who is blessed with the qualities of a hero, needed 3 years of private training just to set foot in it. Our guy knew this because he had stopped playing the game at that point. However, now he wondered why it had been possible for him to enter the mental realm right away. He did not think himself as talented as the game's protagonist, and he certainly did not have protagonist buffs either. Suddenly, Jeong-ma's eyes widened as he recalled that his weapon of choice was a sashimi knife, and he had been using a sashimi knife nearly all of his professional life in this world and the world before. In his previous life, the young lad had been using the sashimi knife for more than 20 years. That was a lot of time. What's more, every time that he unleashed the sword spirit's blessing, he experienced a concentration that transcended perception. The tangled life here and his past life harmoniously intertwined, breaking through situations. That was right. Based on Jeong-ma's experiences so far, avoiding situations only made things worse. Rather than being swept along passively, it would be best for him to tackle what he could do and to solve things step by step. The main character grinned as he was now newly motivated, and he stood with his sashimi knife in hand, ready to give his new theory a try. If he could freely control the mental realm, then he could train in combat without relying on the sword spirit's blessing. So, Kang Jeong-ma closed his eyes and concentrated. For a moment it seemed like nothing happened as he tried to slip into the mental realm. The light from his window illuminated the boy who stood at the center with his knife in hand. The more he focused, the more the light seemed to dim, and the boy was transported outside of his physical body to a realm that only his mind could access. It was a realm with translucent buildings and towering structures, the mental realm. The more the main character focused, the more cracks suddenly began to appear over the picture of his focused form. The cracks were red, and a large demanding hand tore through the pure blue realm and reached for the struggling boy. The hand crept up behind the boy who was focused with his eyes closed, and its long fingernail pressed against the young lad's shoulder. Kang Jeong-ma gripped his sashimi knife tightly, surrounded by a wave of blue with muscles bulging in his arm. The main character was shocked and stared at the sudden transformation in speechless surprise. However, when he tried to adjust his hold on the knife, it started to fade away, much to his shock. Our dude was now transported back to his room just in time to see the knife in his hands turn to dust and fade as well. He could not fathom what on earth had just happened. Meanwhile, in the dark of the night, someone said that the elder had gone too far this time. Indeed, the elder's actions could be seen as a blatant disregard for them. Someone slammed his fist on the table and yelled that it was something they all agreed to. Sending demons was out of the question as those creatures were clearly their enemies. However, someone insisted that such a thing did not matter. They needed to eliminate the troublemakers as soon as possible. Then, someone had to add again that they needed to investigate the top student called Kang Jeong-ma. There was a possibility that the top student was also a candidate for the hero. However, they had been sure that the hero candidate was Leon Van Reinhardt. Still, the Oreo-haired kid was considered a half-baked brat who could not even properly manifest his blessing. That was barely someone worth looking into, and the old man asked if they had forgotten it already. However, the half-baked brat's swordplay had definitely taken down the genius twins during the class placement exam. What was more, Medea was blocking information under the pretense of protecting the student. Everything about our guy was suspicious from start to finish, and they had to admit it. In any case, the hero's fate was unavoidable, and another said that the conclusion was correct. As if that was not enough, the 7 stars were causing trouble. They had to eliminate any possible sprouts quickly before they got in their way. This time their enemies had even brought the Sword Emperor to the academy, a move that the plotters could not stand. since the academy director happened to be one of the 7 stars, their standing as elders had severely weakened. After Basman was defeated, the public only looked up to the 7 stars while the plotters were treated like outdated relics. Nothing frustrated them more. It was them, the elders, who guided the foolish masses and maintained the balance. Even now, if a hero were to appear, their very existence would once again be threatened. Indeed, they needed to maintain their power, and in order to do that they needed a public enemy. The other elders agreed that the hero who threatened the Demon King had to be eliminated. The old man who had been doing most of the speaking was also one of the elders of the academy. Thanks to that awful woman who had beat him up, he was now forced to exert so much effort to persuade the elders with sheer force. The 5th Division commander was furious, and if the elder did nothing there, then he would have to face the 5th Demon King Division command, Calder Acker, who was disguising himself as an academy teacher. Rather than face that sadistic little feline, he would rather beg for death. So, the elders came to an agreement and asked that they issue the orders to the auditor family. A hammer fell dramatically to the ground, which could not necessarily be a good omen, and our guy stared at it with a vicious look in his eyes. Someone was begging so desperately to be spared, and it was an older gentleman with an apron over his clothes. With shaky hands, the main character lifted his sashimi knife despite the man's pleas. Kang Jeong-ma cursed at his situation, but he managed to lower his knife before the cowering man. Our guy's new weapon, the new Mirasame, had been redesigned to fit the specifics of a sashimi knife. It was now 35 centimeters long with a C-rank destructive power, and a range and hardness of E with a high rank potential for growth. Jeong-ma stared at the new sword with immense irritation on his face. The man in charge of working on the sword said that he had been hammering steel for nearly 30 years, but he had never once seen anything like this. To put it simply, it was as if the Mirasame sword itself refused to be forged into another shape. Somehow the sword had broken in two, so the blacksmith had hastily melted the metal and reforged the sword, barely managed to give it a proper shape. If any ordinary blacksmith had tried, the metal would have likely ended up a useless lump of metal. The blacksmith insisted that it only took one strike of the hammer and the sword broken apart, insisting that his tale was true. Even with 20 years of experience with knives, our guy could not help but find the craftsmanship impressive. The specifications also somehow aligned perfectly with the blessing, but the hardness of the sword remained E-rank. The situation was eerie and peculiar, and the blacksmith worried that he would be blamed for damaging the sword. The working man insisted that the potential of the weapon was good, so if it was reinforced, it would definitely become useful. It was not exactly an apology, but if the main character brought the reinforcement materials, then the blacksmith would not charge him. Then the angry student asked what the blacksmith intended to do if the sword broke again. The blacksmith panicked in response, saying that even if it was E-rank, with a rank of growth potential, the weapon stood the chance to become a high rank. There was also the never-fail material, but that material could only possibly be obtained from an A-rank or higher demonic beast. There was no way a student could happen upon that type of thing. High-rank demonic beasts were on par with E-rank demonoids. Jeong-ma was not really into the idea of having to hunt something like a mermaid again. He did not want to risk his life to reinforce the equipment that he had won, and even low-ranked demons dropped reinforcement materials. Despite how careful he had been, the main character's wallet was crying again, and he could not afford all the things that he so desperately needed. Finally, the young lad asked if the blacksmith truly promised. The man swore on his honor as a blacksmith. That aside, the dark-haired boy also added that the blacksmith should refund half the cost of the leftover scrap metal. The worker was shocked. Meanwhile, Jeong-ma reminded the man that it cost 10 million won. The blacksmith protested that he had made the sword exactly as the young lad had ordered it. Besides, as the man had said, he would not charge for enhancement costs. However, the main character easily pointed out that the B-rank sword was reduced to scrap considering the market price, and that seemed fair. The blacksmith was furious and asked what kind of person was our dude for trying to swindle an adult like this. Then Jeong-ma growled that he had been planning on testing the performance of the new weapon anyway, so this worked out perfectly, and he waved the sword threateningly at the blacksmith, much to the man's shock. The man leapt back in horror and quickly began to apologize, begging and saying that he was sorry. The blacksmith begged for 500, saying 500 should be fine. However, the main character was way greedier than that, and he asked for 1,000. The blacksmith was horrified and lowered it a little, asking for 800 and no more. The black-haired kid raised his magical sword, and the blacksmith squealed that even the scraps of a B-rank weapon have a different market value. It was hard to buy scraps for the same price as the original amount. However, the young lad looked very dark and deadly as he demanded that the blacksmith hand over what he had come for, with both his eyes and weapon glinting with deadly delight. The blacksmith was horrified to be faced with such a menacing customer. The man screamed and fell on his ass on the floor, finally agreeing to our guy's demands. Later that day, Kang Jeong-ma read through the usual screen explaining the blessing of the sword god. He had a bit of supper as he read through the usual list of abilities and limitations. After obtaining a new weapon, his armament increased and additional options became available. The biggest reason he hesitated to use the sword god's blessing was the excruciating pain, but now the blessing was finally offering to reduce the pain. He needed to level up that skill no matter what. Actually, the young lady had tested that earlier, and it went from feeling like he was going to die to being able to breathe. However, the pain was still darn unbearable and it hurt a lot. Still, if just one level reduced it this much, then perhaps after consistent leveling he could use the sword god's blessing without the pain. It seemed armament increased when one obtained a new weapon or enhanced it. Now that midterms were over, he would make weapon enhancement his top priority. As long as the main character went on growing like this with a lot of great determination and hard work, he might finally understand the weird demonic power that he had been given. Maybe then he would even figure out who threw him into this crazy world. The black-haired boy was very lost in his thoughts and was busy munching his salty anchovy when Chloe suddenly showed up and greeted him with concern in her eyes. It had been a while away from his temporarily disabled Yandir, and he greeted her. The redhead wanted to know what he was doing as he was taking his time with his meal, and the boy admitted that he had lost his appetite while eating. Then, he realized that she had finally taken off the cast and he was rather happy for her. Jeon-ma asked if her body was okay now and the little assassin happily showed off her skills, saying that she still needed crutches but she felt stronger than before. She did not even fall over on one foot. The girl beamed and said that broken bones healed stronger after breaking and mending after all, and the main character did not know how to tell her that bones were not muscles and she should not be so casually breaking them in the first place. Suddenly, the main character leaned in when he noticed something on her face. Pink filters flushed over them as he plucked away a grain of rice from her face. He was surprised to see it, oblivious to Chloe hitting ecstasy, and nearly fainting from the immense satisfaction of having her crush touch her face. The girl's legs did indeed give out and she hit the ground with a squeak to her surprise. The boy stretched out his hand to help her up, asking if she was okay, and the redhead admitted nervously that she had tripped. Suddenly, they both looked back where our guy had been sitting and the little assassin asked about the wrapped up weapon. He showed it to her and his happy classmate was excited to see his first weapon. She thought that it was very cool. He did not exactly share the sentiment and watched a little anxiously as she handled the weapon. The wrapping slowly started to fall off the sword and the girl's smile was bright as she regarded the pretty blade. It was hard to believe that the sword was E-rank and it looked so adorably good. The young lad smiled sadly at his E-rank sword and Chloe panicked, hurrying to say that was not what she meant and that she meant that for the lowest rank, it was really good. However, that still sounded mean and she hurried to fix her words. Jeon-ma smiled and said that it was fine since he already got some money back from the blacksmith. The man had said that he would not charge for enhancement if he brought the materials, so hopefully, if he enhanced his new knife a lot it would become usable. The redhead cheered him on and said that was right. Her classmate was already strong even with just a sashimi knife, so she was sure that with a proper weapon, he would definitely get even stronger. The black-haired kid thanked her. Honestly, there was no real reason for him to get stronger, and ever since he cut down that mermaid, he had been able to handle mid-tier magical beasts. Besides, the main reason that the boy wanted to enhance his weapon in the first place was just to reduce the pain that his blessing brought him. The young lad sighed heavily as he considered his life. This made Chloe worry and she quickly apologized, saying that she did not mean to insult his weapon. The boy assured her that he was not upset about that. The problem was that seeing the Murasame he got as compensation made him sigh. The redhead stared at the broken weapon with intensity and started mumbling about the blacksmith messing up Jeon-ma's weapon. Those who made her beloved crush suffer also had to suffer and she started glitching and switching to Yandere mode. She began to pledge to kill all of them, but that would just get in the way of the freebies he was supposed to get. He called her name and the redhead snapped out of it in surprise. She apologized and our guy was speechless because there was no correct way to react to your friend threatening murder and meaning it. Suddenly, Jeon-ma sensed something and got serious. This aura that he felt was strong and he wondered why Chloe did not feel it. The redhead then happily skipped after her crush and asked where he was going. The main character stood and stared darkly at the nearby tree. Then, he kicked the tree and demanded they tell him what they were doing. The poor older brother of the little assassin came rolling out of the tree with a groan. The redheads around him were all the same and the older assassin slid back with an annoyed tongue click about how careless he was. Chloe was surprised to see her brother was still skulking and hanging around. Later, our guy set down his sashimi knife while his Yandere friend clung to him like an angry overprotective guard dog as she glared at her brother. Since there was no smell of blood, it seemed Chloe's brother was largely unarmed, and our guy asked if there was something the male redhead wanted from him. This made the older assassin flinch and for a moment there was silence as none of the three spoke. Jeon-ma quickly lost patience with that and said that he already explained it to the other boy before in a way that he could understand. The male turned to glare at the main character, saying that he came looking for him, yes, but it was not because of their old beef. Then, the dark-haired boy wanted to know why the redhead boy had come then. The redhead muttered that even if he told only Chloe, it was obvious that it would reach the gloomy student's ears. So, it was better for the red boy to just tell them both directly. This was all related of course to Kang Jeon-ma. The red boy adjusted his mask and turned as he announced that the Academy's elders had made a request that the Oreo-haired boy be disposed of. The sashimi knife wielder was shocked that the Academy's elders had appeared, and of all things they were focusing on him. The little assassin yelled at her brother and asked if the older redhead had come because of that and if he intended to hurt her friend. The older brother was in pain, calling his sister and saying that she had been away from home too long and that she had lost her edge. She growled and asked her friend to get behind her, refusing to let her brother harm him. The female redhead was determined to handle this herself. She cried out for Jeon-ma to hurry while swinging her crutch around like she was not lame in one leg. To both guys, she looked kinda ridiculous. The redhead boy sighed and said that his sister's instincts turned out to still be very sharp. Then, the boy turned to the main character saying that he did not actually care what the talented student had been up to, but the elders were oddly fixated on him. Not just the redhead boy, but even within the auditor family, there was a sense of unease. They had temporarily postponed the elder request, and the request had been made in secret, bypassing the academy head. A request to eliminate a mere student went strongly against the auditor family principles. However, since it was a direct order from the elders, it was hard for the family to ignore. If the pressure from the top went on, then the family would eventually have no choice but to investigate the scary student. The redhead boy sighed as he rubbed his mask. Whatever the case, his sister was a member of the family, so she needed to know what was going on. The little assassin was surprised to hear this. The boy had come under the pretext of the family's principles, but in the end, he had just been worried about his sister. Our guy could not help but admire that. That was all that the older boy had to say and he quickly turned to leave before he got even more mushy around them. However, Jeon-ma called out to Nox and the assassin paused, glancing over his shoulder at the other boy. The gloomy student was wary about the red-headed boy as the last time they had met. The redhead had said something different. However, the older assassin interrupted and muttered that his sister was happiest when she was by the weird student's side. So, the brother would not debate the truth. Even he, her brother, had never seen his sister that happy. The girl was shocked to hear her brother speak in such a soft way. Even the main character was shocked to see Nox openly speak in a soft way. The brother made a request that Jeon-ma not let Chloe get hurt anymore. This was surprising to Jeon-ma and he wondered what the assassin boy was even talking about. It was not like it was his fault that her leg had gotten hurt. They had just happened to be on the same team. The redhead seemed to get tense the longer our guy gaped at him in silence, and the student managed to work up the strength to say that he would look after her, though that would be to the best of his own ability, and as long as she was near. The assassin boy then decided to ask our guy just one thing. He asked how the black-haired boy had become so strong. For some reason, this was news to the scary student, as he had not at all realized that he was strong. To be considered strong, one should have the ability to withstand any threats at all times, kind of like the Sword Emperor. Someone like him, who could only maintain that level of strength for less than a minute a day, was not at a level where he could casually boast about being strong. The idiot was oblivious to the fact that no student should be that strong. Still, Jeonma did not feel like he could even talk about strength in such a situation. Nox, who used Cole as an excuse, revealed family secrets to him, an outsider, so there was no way that our guy could trust the assassin to keep his mouth shut. So, the Oreo-haired main dude called Nox and informed the gifted assassin that he lacked desperation. The assassin asked what the boy meant, and the main character explained that it did not matter how much of an auditor the assassin was. There was a certain vibe that came from real-world experience. If the older assassin remained cooped up in the academy, then he would eventually hit his growth limit soon. So, the youth advised the assassin to go out and gain some real-world experience. With a lot of hard work, Nox would surely eventually gain something. The redhead was shocked at these words of wisdom, but our main character was already scurrying away after acting cool. He knew he was not entirely wrong, but he had spent enough time hanging around the assassin, and it was time to leave. Meanwhile, someone was busy writing on a chalkboard and explaining, including order and prosperity, above all things. There were countless gods in the heavens. The really important lesson was going on, but our guy couldn't care less. He was busy pondering what he should do about the situation with the Academy elders targeting him. The Academy elders descend from 5 of Balor Hayakin's 7 disciples, and he remembered them as a group with immense influence, not just in the Academy but in the whole wide world. However, since their role in the game was to constantly obstruct the protagonist for the sake of their own power and safety, they were called corrupt remnants by the players. Now, Jeonma wondered why on earth he was such a thorn in their side that they would decide to get rid of him. Instead of paying attention in class, he was busy doodling on his notes, and he wrote down all the things that he had done so far that were of note. Looking at what he had written, it turned out that the main character had actually caused a lot of trouble. He had wanted to practice peace, safety, and stability, but that was seeming impossible by the day. At this point, it was like he was trying to stand out. Still, no matter what he had done, it made no sense for the elders to target him, as he had not done anything bad. He then glanced down at the last point he had written that involved saving Leon during the midterms on Scopuli Island when they had encountered the mermaid. That is when he realized that they were not after him, but the protagonist of the story. Jeonma had just happened to be in the way, and now they wanted to remove that obstacle. No matter how well Media covered it up, the fact that he had been the one to defeat the mermaid must have reached the ears of the highest ranks of noble society. Plus, the fact that they were targeting Leon, the hero candidate, suggested that someone among them, or perhaps all of them, were colluding with demons. Now that was a very serious situation. They did not just try to obstruct the hero, they had tried to kill him. A young student who was just a boy. It was frightening just thinking about it. No matter how corrupt the elders were, this was way too much. They were not supposed to prioritize preserving their own power over the safety of humanity. And the Academy. The main character had not expected the elders to be so darn rotten. He could storm into the chambers of the elders and cut them all down. But it was not yet the right time for them to die. When the time came though, the dark-haired boy would not hesitate, and he would surely cut down all of those nasty old men. Meanwhile, the teacher told all the students to take notes, and our dude internally groaned as he was having issues focusing in class. He was too busy focusing on cutting people down. He scribbled a bit more on his notes and figured that he could try some weapon enhancements, and he would have to go to the dungeon to do that. First, he would need to gather a party, as the dungeon was too hard to conquer by himself. Chloe would definitely help, and instead of getting a brute like Rachel, he would prefer to team up with someone a bit more strategic. The teacher went on babbling and teaching about future generations while our guy stayed making plans. A wonderful idea came to his mind, and he realized it would be great to get Speed Weapon on his team. He would go and ask the odd boy for help. Later, the main character made his way to the dragon class, and someone cracked their knuckles as they greeted the famous dude. The ugly-looking student grinned, saying that this place was not for lowlifes like him to come and go as he pleased. The MC had almost forgotten that he was still a special student and that discrimination was still a thing. Jeonma sighed to see a third-rate extra get in his way. With 20 years of experience in the food industry and customers he had dealt with, someone like the teenage lump before him was just really annoying to deal with. The main character asked the dude not to bother him before he cut off his jaw. The angry brute yelled in anger and surprise. He raised his fist and got ready to swing in rage, and Jeonma saw him coming. The big brute was moving way too slowly. Suddenly, his eyes widened as someone jumped in front of him. The big brute got knocked back instantly with a huge hit to the jaw that threw him back. Some of the other students wondered what was going on and if there was a fight. Fortunately, the coast was clear and the big brute lay flat on his back, knocked out cold. The orange-haired hero muttered in annoyance that the brute's jaw was so darn hard that it hurt his hand. The main character had heard of strength mages, but a strength healer was something completely new. Speed Weapon groaned and wondered if he had hit the jaw too hard. Then, he happily turned to face our guy, asking if he had come to find him. The healer then asked if they should take the conversation outside. So, they did take the conversation outside and the boys talked. So, it turned out that the black-haired boy needed to form a party as soon as possible. Weapon was happy to help Jeonma recruit members, and the clear rewards would be split among the rest of the team. In exchange, the dark-haired student got to keep the materials from the magical beasts. That seemed to be the entire agreement. The main character admitted that if he tried to gather a party, it was likely that only Chloe would join him. Bro was really out here underestimating his riz. So, Jeonma asked Weapon to help with the dragon class, as that would be much easier. The orange-haired healer sipped his drink and agreed that our guy would need at least 4 members to get a dungeon clearance permit. If it were not for the academy rules, someone like the gloomy youth would likely clear 5 or 6 dungeons alone. The black-haired boy wondered where on earth the healer got that confidence in him from, as he did not think he could clear a dungeon alone. The healer laughed and pointed out that the impressive student had taken down a mermaid by himself, and now he was saying that. The healer laughed that being too humble was annoying. Then the main character realized that others seemed to think that he was being modest. The orange-haired kid smiled at our guy and said that it seemed he was doing better now. The dark-haired boy was surprised but admitted that it was thanks to the good treatment. He had rested for a few days and then got better. The healer smiled and agreed to take the boy's offer as he saw no reason to refuse. Plus, he had the feeling that working with the guy would be a fun new experience. Ma was grateful to Weapon and thanked him. Then, the healer asked if the main character had any dungeons in mind and he immediately replied with a C-rank buffalo dungeon. That was the one in Chiawan. The orange-haired boy pondered the choice, saying a buffalo dungeon was pretty classic. Then, him, Chloe and the main character made 3, so he asked if our guy had any preferences for the last member. The boy admitted that he would prefer for it to not be Rachel or Leon. The healer laughed that those two would not come anyway. Rachel had been in seclusion since Ma was hospitalized, and she was practicing in the academy training grounds. Meanwhile, Leon was preparing for upper grade dungeon raids with 2nd and 3rd year students. The main character was very pleased to hear that both troublesome students would be too busy to join up with him. Meanwhile, Weapon pondered their other options. Suddenly, he had an idea as there was one person who did come to mind. By now, they were probably already sleeping, which surprised Ma. He wondered who on earth could be sleeping at this hour, but Speed Weapon said that was just how the person was. He tossed the empty can into the bin and said that they needed to go to the cafeteria to buy something first. Later that evening, someone said, "Excuse me." The door was open so they were allowed to enter a traditional Japanese-looking house. The main character was surprised as he had not known that the academy had such a place. Even during his time playing Miracles Blessing M, he had never come here. In his past life, he was a Japanese cuisine chef, but he never actually went to Japan. He had always wanted to visit Japan, but it was nice to have this vicarious satisfaction by entering a Japanese-styled house. Suddenly, they appeared at a shooting range with multiple arrows hitting their center target. Finally, they found who they were looking for, and it was someone dozing nearby. Weapon asked for the girl to wake and our guy was speechless as he happened to recall this character. Weapon bent and asked the girl to wake up already, but that was not working. So, he whispered to the sleeping girl that he had bought it. That immediately fired her up and she sat up, though looking rather dizzy. The orange-haired boy grinned and pointed at Ma, telling the girl to look at him. The girl suddenly leapt to her feet and bolted towards the surprised main character. Fortunately, she was just aiming for the bag in his hand. The bag was swiped immediately, and the girl tumbled in the air like a little whirlwind, much to the boy's shock. She looked like a spinning demon as she snatched the bag, and then there was a loud thud. The next moment was the girl happily munching on some treats as she lay on top of the fallen dark-haired boy who had been flattened to the ground. The girl happily said that the treat was delicious while Ma was struggling to get his bearings. Suddenly, the girl spoke and beamed at Ma, asking him if he had any more yongi. One time, back in our guy's previous life, when he was working in the kitchens as usual, they heard a very loud alarming click that had all the chefs immediately raise their heads. It was here, it had finally come to them, the thing they had been waiting for. The only pastime after living a life of nothing but work, the Miracles Blessing M. It was a really big deal in our guy's former life. In both the game and real life, he was barely holding on among the stench of men, so at last the game had come to comfort him. The main character trembled in the work bathroom in his former life, and laughed that it had popped up right after he spent some money. The game brought him his angel who made him spend money, the beautiful Abel von Nubel. However, instead of seeing his angel, a similar-looking girl casually called to him and asked if he had any yongi. Her name was Saki Ryozo and she was not able. The main character was frozen in horror and confusion as he stared at his phone and he realized that he had gotten scammed. Miracles Blessing M was a narrative centered around the protagonist, Leon, and it featured numerous heroines. Among them, the character officially designated as the main heroine by the game developers was Abel von Nibelung. Though each heroine flaunted unique charm and abilities, Abel and Leon were often the ones to come and get everyone else out of a very difficult situation. The story in the game depicted Abel and Leon overcoming hardships, and it also showcased the blossoming of their love. Even the main character had been captivated by Abel's charm when he was just a player, and he had opened his wallet like he was under a spell. He ended up spending over 141 just to get Abel. As a result, the other heroines gradually faded into the background. Among those defeated heroines, the one who faded the fastest was Saki, the blue-haired Abel lookalike. Our guy's first 5-star, the daughter of Gialgan, Saki Ryozo. That just happened to be the girl that he was facing now, and she had just flattened him to the ground, so they were not off to the best start, and she was somehow still asking him about Yongi. The main character was speechless for a while, and the girl turned, saying that he looked a bit foolish. So, this girl was the reason that Weapon was so confident. Having used her, our dude was aware that Ryozo was a top-tier DPS among ranged attackers. Though it did not seem like it, she was a skill-based character that was completely different from Leon. Plus, since she barely impacted the main story, her joining the party would not disrupt the plot. Probably. Our guy sure hoped that everything would be fine if he teamed up with her. The girl asked her friend Weapon what brought him here, and he held some treats to keep her attention. She snatched the treat and asked him to spit out his request, so the orange-haired boy introduced her to Kang Ma. She must have already heard of Goem Ma, and she mumbled that she did. Well, the dark-haired boy had come to the healer that afternoon, and he saw him getting harassed by some punk earlier. The blue-haired girl asked for them to just get to the point already. Weapon sighed and then admitted that they were recruiting for the Buffalo Dungeon raid next week. The orange-haired boy's explanation is a whole mess, which lived up to his name Speed Weapon. They were to split the clear rewards except the horns. This curious offer made the girl glance at Ma, and then she walked over to him like she wanted to inspect him a bit more. He was the one that fought that one guy back then in the training subspace. She remembered the main character from that time. Ma admitted that it had been him, and the lady stared intensely at him. Ma stared back with concern. The girl then whipped away, saying that since dungeon clear rewards also reflected on their grades, then there was no real reason to refuse. However, the Oreo-haired boy seemed less determined than she had expected him to be. The main character wondered if she had room to judge considering he had found her half asleep. Then Saki apologized, but she did not want to work with someone who seemed so unmotivated. However, Speedweapon insisted that she had seen his duel, and that Ma was no ordinary guy. The girl refused to back down so easily and just shrugged that perhaps his opponents were just weak. The orange-haired boy could not believe that Defense's his opponent was someone from the Auditor family, and during the midterms, well, the orange-haired boy had to quickly stop himself there as he had nearly given away a very important secret. The girl noticed and our guy darkened intense. Speedweapon groaned and said that he could not explain it, but he wanted the girl to just listen. However, she was not his family dog and she had no intention of listening. The healer pointed out that the archer had the tendency to drool over Yongjings like a mutt, so she did not have much of an excuse. The girl yelled that the healer had bragged that he was a Yongjing expert, and he insisted that was why he had brought some with him in the first place. Meanwhile, the main character was wondering what the healer's deal was. A party member could be greedy or rude, but not both. If she was just gonna cause trouble, our guy did not see a reason to stick around begging someone like her to join them. So, the black-haired boy called to Speedweapon, saying that the begging was enough. They would go as that kind of uncooperative attitude was poisonous to a party anyway. They would go and find someone better. This immediately offended Saki, who growled and said that she guessed that the dungeon raid was clearly not that urgent after all. The Oreo-haired boy did not know what to say in response to that. The boy then opened his jacket and pulled out one of his small sashimi knives. The two were shocked when he pulled out the knife and it was glowing. Ma casually sliced the air with his knife and it formed a very clean arc in front of the two who stood before him. The knife flew from his hand, hitting the target in the distance dead center, and he had not even been looking. The girl was shocked to see such a display of strength, and she turned to the gloomy student in shock just as he pulled forth yet another knife. Her eyes widened in alarm as yet another knife flew and once again hit the target dead center, so it had not been a lucky throw the first time. Then, looking extra cool, the Oreo-haired kid asked the lazy archer if she was interested now. The girl was speechless. Shivers traveled through her as she stared at the boy in awe and she was unsure what to say. Later, much later, a door swung open and Saki greeted. The girl looked a little geeky in her glasses and uniform. The rest of her team members had arrived and they noted that she had arrived rather early. Chloe happily greeted the other girl, and the brunette locked eyes with the dark-haired boy. The archer nervously greeted him too, though she was still a little wary of his scary skill. Gioma also managed to greet her, noting that using his sashimi knife to threaten people worked every time. The healer sat beside his friend and was amazed that she had already gotten the work done, though she mumbled that it was just a few clicks. The permits were now ready, so they were ready to start. The team gathered around in the room and it was time for them to begin. Speedweapon cleared his throat and got busy putting down some notes on the drawing board. The buffalo dungeon housed C-rank demonoid buffaloes, and he drew them so poorly they looked like pigs in disguise. Apparently, the demonoids were nicknamed water buffalo and they had the tendency to charge from a distance, so it was advised that everyone be careful. Close combat against the demonoids would be tough, but they were weak to ranged attacks. They had one really important rule to follow, and that was the one thing that they must never do. They were to never open the stone gate at the center of the dungeon. The red had asked what would happen if they did, and the healer admitted that rumors said that it was some kind of seal or something. It was just a hypothesis and nothing had been confirmed. The academy's permit required them to leave the gate closed, so there was no reason for them to disobey. So, Kang Jioma smiled and noted down the rule that they were to never open that suspiciously dark and locked door. The other three members of his team went silent as they stared at him. The boy was surprised at the sudden tension. Then, Speedweapon asked the dark-haired kid if he happened to know what was behind that door. The boy hurriedly denied having such information, saying that obviously they should not touch it. However, he actually knew there was a hidden boss behind that door and he wanted nothing to do with that hidden boss. The healer was relieved and mumbled that he thought the worst, which made the dark-haired boy mentally sigh in relief as everyone went right back to what they were doing. The dark locked gate would only open under specific conditions. It was locked by the system now anyway, so he did not have to worry about it. Ignoring that risk, the efficiency of the dungeon that he had picked was unmatched. Then his eyes strayed to the brunette archer who was busy munching on her favorite snack as usual. The gloomy student was surprised to have been caught staring, so he just mentioned his surprise at how much the girl really liked that snack. Saki replied that it was normal for brainy types to need candy. However, Jioma thought that was rather ironic when the girl could not even form proper sentences. That is when the boy noticed something that he might have forgotten for a bit too long. There was growling coming from Chloe. The Yander had noticed him staring too long at another woman and she was already pulling out her knife. However, the boy tensed when he noticed something even more important. Even now, as he held his meeting, they were being watched. The boy turned to Chloe, who was fighting to keep her Yander in check and losing. For now, the main character and his team could only wait, with his eyes shrouded in darkness. The enemy would eventually appear when the time came. Gamnol Duchorwan was a place they had to get to using the bus. The dark and gloomy main character sat in the bus, thinking very deeply about his situation. Back in his former life, when the main guy had gotten discharged from the army, he had sworn that he would never go back to the city of Chiorwan again, not even to pee in it. Fate sure was laughing in his face now, cause here he was on a bus right back to Piss City. Jioma had never imagined that he would come back like this. The car tires screeched to a halt, and a voice spoke, noting that the bus was from Hawakan Academy, and the voice asked how they could assist. The main character peeked out of the bus window and noticed a man handling some odd-looking barriers outside. This is when he noted that there were civilian restrictions in place, and he wondered if this was because the border was a dungeon zone. Security was definitely tight around that area. Meanwhile, Jioma once again noted that the elders were watching their every move. Speedweapon called out from the back of the bus and he asked his hero if he would like some eggs. The Oreo-haired boy was surprised by the offer and he politely declined, wondering if people still randomly ate eggs on the bus nowadays. The orange-haired healer asked his captain if he was getting nervous over a measly C-rank dungeon, and asked the boy to lighten up. Jioma nervously laughed and accepted that he should be calm. Then, the healer asked his friend Saki if she wanted any eggs. The sulking brunette wanted no eggs, and Chloe was dozing with her katana pressed close. Speed Weapon thought it was their loss since the eggs tasted so good. Suddenly, the brunette glanced up, her blue eyes tracking the main character and watching as he spoke casually to her friend. He noticed someone watching and glanced back at her, just in time for her to get caught staring. This was of course something that Saki did not appreciate, so she turned away with an annoyed huff and scowled. Unknown to her, the poor hero had bigger fish to fry. He already felt watched knowing that the elders were targeting him. He did not need little Miss Blue to stare at him and make that feeling worse. Eventually, the bus came to a stop and the teammates hopped out. The redhead marveled at their new destination, happy that they had arrived. The weather was perfect too and the sky was clear. Still, Jioma was a little nervous as this place was where ancient demons once nested. Now, it was reduced to a simple farming dungeon. The orange-haired healer could not help but ask the main character why he'd brought so much luggage like he was moving into his marriage home. The main character just smirked and asked Weapon if he was curious about that. Smirking like a bandit, the black-haired boy unzipped his heavy bag and showed off his huge stack of deadly weapons. It was a giant bag chock full of sashimi knives. Bro had more sashimi knives than he could possibly use. Speed Weapon was mystified and could not stop from asking if our guy had come all this way just to sell knives. Still, the MC smirked and said that it was better to be safe than sorry. The healer smiled in amusement, saying the dark-haired boy talked like an old man. But he believed that the hero had his reasons. Chloe happily leapt into the conversation, saying that she would take point as always in this team. Jioma was counting on her as usual. So, it was time for them to move out and the students marched forward and approached the dungeon. The dungeon gate was sealed when they got there because security was at maximum level and the guards around the area were preparing to open the gates for the students. The guards looked up, noticing immediately once the students arrived. The main character and his group also paused for a moment to regard the rocky dungeon before them. The security recognized them as students from Howkin Academy, and they asked them to just write all 4 names on the visitor log before they entered the dungeon. The class got busy and wrote their names in no particular order on the page they'd been given. However, the security tensed after Jioma wrote his name and the MC immediately noticed. The healer then called their captain, asking what he was doing and urging the boy to hurry up. The dark-haired boy agreed with the healer, and the team turned to the gates as they cracked open before them. Immediately, the orange-haired boy complained about the stench and he warned them to watch their steps as they entered. Meanwhile, the main character was still thinking of the man whose eyes wavered when he saw his name. Glancing behind him as the door shut, the Oreo-haired kid hoped that this situation would be fine. The door closed with a final thud and the team walked deeper into the dungeon. They had been walking for a while when they noticed some very ridiculous doodles on the cave wall. Some of them were doodles of couples writing their names and drawing hearts between them, and others were just random phrases. It was like looking at the walls of a middle school bathroom. The main lead could not help but wonder when dungeons became tourist hotspots. Nobles really did abuse their privileges. They'd been walking for a while when someone suddenly grabbed our guy by the elbow. It was Saki, and the brunette whined about how she felt so tired. The boy with the white stripe in his hair glanced back at her and he had to admit that she did look tired. The girl sulked that if only she had something sweet, then she would feel better right away. Then she asked if their team lead had some sweets that she could nibble. While our guy started rummaging in his pockets, the brunette grinned in anticipation as she waited for her sweet snack. Then, he suddenly handed her a tiny sweet. The girl was stupefied, saying that candy was not her thing and she asked if he had any yonging instead. Jioma had no intention of dealing with all that and he growled, asking if she thought he was her mum and that she should bring her own snacks if she wanted them so badly. The girl had the cheek to say that she was saving her own snacks for later. Irritated enough, the dark-haired boy turned away with a glare, wishing the girl would focus. The brunette had to settle for the sweet he had given her when the redhead suddenly pulled them to a stop. She had detected 4 monsters coming their way. They were charging from 200 meters away and the team had to get ready to face combat immediately. Speed Weapon turned to the girls and reminded them to stick to the plan to minimize the danger that would come from facing the incoming beasts. He then called Chloe and Saki, saying that he would buff them properly so that the girls could fight, and he told them not to let him down. There was a flutter and the Japanese girl yanked the cloth off her giant bow as she readied herself for combat. Jioma was admittedly impressed by the formidable weapon. It was an S-grade weapon called the Crimson Bow, and with this, clearing the dungeon would be a breeze. The brunette groaned that it might have been too long since she used her powerful bow, and it was now feeling a little stiff. She ought to take better care of her weapons. The main character wondered if he could really trust her. Suddenly, the brunette said they should wait. Then, she yanked out her favorite sweet snack and took a big munch out of it. She gasped in joy at how absolutely delicious the snack tasted. And the MC wondered again if he could really trust this clown to protect his life. The beasts were already coming and they had no time to spare worrying about things like that. All the members of the team got ready to fight and brace themselves. The hooves of the incoming beast beat hard against the rocky ground as they approached, and our guy yelled for them to attack. Saki got ready with her bow and Chloe got ready with her menacing glare. Their healer pulled out his recorder and started to play, boosting them all with power buffs. The monster buffalo charged out of the dark, roaring and flapping their tongues. The redhead was the first to greet them, racing out to meet the opponents, while the other members of the team fell behind. The girl took off, launching from the floor, and she charged at the bull before her. The bull roared as it got hit, crying out in pain, and it fell to the rock with a cry of anguish. However, that was just one attacker and the rest of the monster bulls rushed forward. The redhead was slightly irritated by the insistent charge and prepared to take down the rest. She explained that she was going to slow them down up front and reached for her sword. The orange-haired boy yelled for the assassin to abandon that plan and fall back like they had planned. Meanwhile, someone else was sure that she had the monsters right between her eyes. Saki appeared out of nowhere, her hair flowing like a river as she focused on her target and aimed the arrow. The arrow flew from her magically charged bow, wisps of smoke and air dancing around her as it flew. The arrows sailed forward like lights and they flew right at the charging stampede of raging black bulls. Chloe watched in awe as those arrows cut right through the monsters, obliterating them as soon as they made contact. The monsters were torn in colors of red and gold, and the little assassin's eyes widened as the beasts fell apart before her. The Japanese girl grinned at her success, thinking that taking the monsters down had gone much easier than she had expected. She even playfully said oops, and then went right back to munching her tasty treat. Our favorite gremlin stared at her for a moment, thinking it would be really bad if they broke all the horns they had come to collect. Still, a victory was a victory, and he could not help but smile, impressed at the massive amount of targets that he had taken down. A skilled DPS could not be stopped, and the archer was pretty good at what she did. Then again, the horns were for Ma's enhancement materials, and he could not afford to lose them just because Saki was so good. Weapon asked if they ought to go even deeper into the dungeon. It seemed like a good call. Suddenly, a piece of rock broke from a formation, alerting them to the charge of one more raging bull that ran independently of the others. It jumped right in the path of the archer as she was munching her sweet treat. It was one of the bulls that had fallen earlier, and it was annoying to see it back on its feet. The Japanese girl got ready to run, but somehow she stumbled and dropped her weapon. The giant beast loomed over the surprised girl, and for a moment it looked like it would be lights out for Saki. The girl raised her arms in preparation for the incoming attack, but no harm came to her. The brunette instead opened her eyes to find a marvelous sight. She was held in the arms of the talented student with dark hair. Ma had come to save her life, dispelling the beast with one sharp swish of his sashimi knife. His weapon was so sharp that it sliced the beast clean in two. His face was serious as he regarded his opponent, a halo of awesomeness and cool aura radiating around him. For a moment, Saki found her breath stolen away. The beast fell apart before them, each side crashing down with a heavy thud, and great wind swept the girl's hair back. Then, Ma asked if she was okay, and the brunette was speechless at first. A blush came upon her cheeks, and she hiccuped at how absolutely cool the main character had looked in that moment. Meanwhile, somewhere else, somewhere dangerous, a phone rang. One of the guards that stood outside the dungeon gate picked the call, and just as the MC had feared, he confirmed information that the man he worked for wanted to know. Ma was busy. He was a man on a mission, and his mission was to retrieve as many bull horns as possible, so he got busy. It was a huge part of the reason that they had come to this dungeon in the first place. Buffalo horns were a versatile C-rank reinforcement material used for weapon grades and other purposes. He was just thinking that they should take as many as they could carry when the brunette suddenly called to him. Saki handed him some of her favorite snack and said it was thanks since he saved her earlier, and giving him the thing that she treasured the most was her way of saying thanks. The gloomy lead just glanced at her like he had gotten a major ike from her act of kindness. However, Ma was actually quite perplexed by the raging inferno that he could sense coming from Chloe because he dared help out the brunette. He turned and called out to the redhead, who seemed shocked to have suddenly been called. About the staff member earlier, the dark-haired boy had a few things that he intended to whisper about, and he whispered all of his thoughts into the redhead's ears. The girl understood his commands, and the two kept talking to each other. Meanwhile, the orange-haired boy suddenly asked the two classmates if they were dating, since that would somehow make a lot of sense to him. Of course, this absolutely triggering question set the little assassin off in a gushing and blushing spree that someone actually assumed that she was dating her crush. However, the dark-haired boy just chuckled and said that assuming all male and female relationships were romantic was a really narrow-minded thing to do. Weapon was shameless and said that he thought for sure that they were definitely a couple since he always saw them together. Of course, this resulted in Chloe glaring in great disappointment, and her classmate could not for the life of him figure out what made her upset now. By the way, the redhead asked if there were always these few mobs to fight in the dungeon. They had been standing around for a whole, and no other monsters had shown up. Suddenly, thanks to Red jinxing the situation, the team heard a really foreboding thud come from deep inside the pit. They went silent for a moment. Then, the healer pointed out that no matter how popular a dungeon was, it was unnatural for it to be this empty. He asked his Japanese friend what she thought, and she thought deeply about the situation for a hot minute, agreeing that the buffaloes they fought also seemed a little off. The rest of the team was a little surprised and asked how the buffalo were off. Well, Saki admitted that it looked like the monsters had been running from something. Buffaloes usually did not behave that way, so it did not make any sense to her. Weapon agreed that the monsters were often rather docile, and locals could even use them for farming. This meant that something was very wrong. However, Ma thought the truly wrong occurrence was people using demonic buffalo for farming. Clearly, something was wrong with the common folk. Well, there was more than one suspicious thing, but they all hoped that it was likely nothing. No matter what the situation was, they still had a signal and could reach out for help whenever they needed it, so they were sure that the situation was okay. By the way, Ma was curious about how the healer and the archer had come to know each other. Saki proudly boasted that she had topped the written exams, while the healer had placed second. The boy had bragged about it for weeks, and the healer now growled that she should not dirty his name. The girl beamed and posed, saying that for the record, she had ranked third in placement tests, and she was very proud of that too. Meanwhile, the main character was impressed that the healer had somehow placed second on written tests, as he had thought the orange-haired boy was just a loudmouth. Speedweapon was surprised to hear that his hero thought him a loudmouth. Rachel was his distant cousin too. Now, the main character pondered the situation of the healer being relatives with the violent hyena girl. It made sense why Ma as a player had not known about the healer's connections to the main characters. The orange-haired boy explained that his family was a branch of the Changseong clan, Rachel's mainline. The boy seemed about to say something else, but he trailed off and told them to just forget about it, and that there was no point to even talking about it. The dark-haired guy was silent for a moment, and the healer gently punched his shoulder, asking why their team lead was glaring. The healer said that he was living the dream. The main character was the impressive one, and Weapon asked our guy not to forget him once he got famous. The dark-haired boy said that would not happen, so the healer did not have to worry about it. Weapon walked forward with his hands in his pockets and said that their lead might even end up joining one of the 7 heroes. The redhead said that Weapon was right about the Ma's potential. The dark-haired boy was silent and kept pondering, his eyes drifting to the silent Japanese girl. The brunette said nothing and kept walking. The brunette then said that she happened to hate the 7 heroes. It was such a bold declaration that it took the others quite by surprise. Even Weapon wondered what her problem was. Anyway, it was time for them to go and they needed to finish this dungeon fast and go back. Suddenly, the main character paused as he noticed some strange looking gashes on the wall. The healer noted that they needed 20 kills to clear the dungeon. But the MC's focus stayed on those strange purple gashes that oozed bad news. Once again, the orange-haired boy called out to Jeonma and asked what he was doing, telling him that they had to keep going. The dark-haired boy agreed and walked on, ignoring the strange purple rocks that fell to the floor. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, the guard at the gates informed someone that all the preparations were done as instructed. The students had likely encountered the enraged buffaloes at that point, so there was no need to worry. The person making demands said that it was easy for the guard to say, and then they asked the guards if they had done anything else. Of course, the security had followed all of the instructions. However, personally, the security thought that they would all be dealt with by the enraged buffaloes. His employer yelled at him, laughing and telling the security man not to sound cocky. His employer turned out to be the traitor teacher who was secretly a demoness. She asked the security if he would take responsibility if it failed, and he was struck with fear. Well, the lady was sure that the man at the gate had done well, and he was just to call her with the results as soon as the deed was done. She wished him good luck, and the man gave his acknowledgement for the matter. The man sighed, knowing that either way, he was dead. A very dark aura was seeping from the gate of the dungeon that stood before him. Just in case, the security had forced the gate open. The chances of the students surviving the dungeon, he had locked them in, was 0. However, still, the eyes of the main lead lingered in his mind, haunting him. It was like the boy could see through everything. It was unnerving, and the security stepped forward, deciding to check inside just for a moment. Deep inside the cave, the walls of the rock had switched from concrete to dirt. They walked in further when Chloe suddenly called out to the dark-haired boy. The girl admitted that she could sense magical beasts approaching from behind, and he asked how many were coming their way. The girl frowned and said that the blessing detected roughly 50 monsters coming right at them. The boy was shocked, and the healer asked what was wrong. The rumble and thud of the monsters approaching grew stronger, and the students tensed as their enemies approached. The closer they came, the paler the students became as they recognized the might of the foes they might have to face. The thudding got louder and louder, and the buffalo demons suddenly appeared, racing forward in a uniform and deadly stampede. The students were like ants before them, and the orange-haired boy cursed. Buffaloes never swarmed. That was not a thing, and they were not even sure the approaching enemies could be called buffaloes. The mad and enraged monsters bellowed as they charged at the alarmed group, their eyes blazing red like they hungered to spill blood. The healer yelled that the monsters were supposed to be harmless, and even Jeonma was speechless at this development. A stampede of buffaloes was more than he expected, and he intended to summon his knife right away. However, the boy paused as he recalled that every blade had its purpose. His master from his old life had taught him that one could not use a chicken knife to kill an ox, just as sashimi knives were meant for fish. Back then, the main character had joked about beef sashimi. After all, it was silly to use a sashimi knife to butcher an ox. His master's hand had swung, and the boy flinched, immediately apologizing. Then the young lad paused when his master's hand did not come down. He cracked open his eyes in surprise and saw that the fish had been sliced perfectly like always. His master smiled down at his glorious work and admitted that his students' words were also true. Suddenly, our guy had been reminded of his past, and he laughed nervously as the enemy approached. It looked like they would have to slice cows with a fish knife. Focused, Jeonma ordered Chloe to distract the herd. She was not to charge straight in, and she was to move quickly left and right to disrupt their formation. There was no need to attack, as all she needed to do was just to draw their attention. The girl replied that she understood, and the dark-haired boy turned to smile, asking the healer if he was ready. The orange-haired boy was surprised, but he was encouraged by his leader's relaxed posture and said that he was born ready. The Japanese girl could not understand why the dark-haired boy was so calm when facing 50 buffalo, but the leader called to her, much to her surprise. The Oreo-haired boy told her to hold the front and to stop anything that got too close. She was surprised by the order, but she agreed, still wondering why the odd boy was so composed. The healer smiled as he pulled out his recorder, telling the brunette not to be surprised. Saki stared in confusion at the odd group as they readied for battle. A herd of buffalo and a sashimi knife. The main character reminded himself not to overthink. It was better to be safe than sorry, and that was why he had come ready. No matter what was in front of them, no matter how many, he would cut them all down. So, he grabbed his sashimi knives and he pulled out many at once, holding them between his fingers like they were tiny daggers. Then, Jeonma activated the blazing blessing of the sword god. The buffalo screamed as they charged at him, but the boy met them head-on and unafraid. The red-shaded beasts leapt with nothing but carnage and destruction on their minds. The boy, in turn, unleashed his sashimi knives right at the charging bulls. The archer watched in awe as the healer worked hard to give them all buffs. Saki's baby blue eyes widened in shock to see our guy do what she considered impossible. Saki's tasty treat fell to the ground with a splat. It was rare for her to not finish her favorite snack, but the brunette was in awe as she stared at Jeonma. The girl thought that he looked crazy as he stood before them, bathed in the red light that was the blood of their enemies. The young student stood on their corpses as he faced the danger ahead, unscathed and unbothered. He looked like a dark knight as the shadows danced around him, his dark eyes hooded as he stared into the abyss. The brunette's eyes widened and she was rendered speechless. In a split second, the boy before her had flown forward, and he had used his special blessing to wipe out the enemies that had appeared before them. Those charging buffalo had barely stood a chance, especially with the combined attack from Chloe, who used her feline's blessing to launch her own attack. The buffaloes had raged, but they were no match for the redhead's deadly skill, and she made quick work of them using Schrodinger's cat. The young girl had flashed with speed, dancing as she destroyed the enemies that appeared before her. The buffalo were decimated and they fell to their knees in defeat. Of course, Chloe did not fight alone, and a shadow followed quickly behind her. It was Jeonma, and he launched his own spinning attack, knocking down anyone she missed. The dark demons did not even get the time to process what hit them, because in moments they were torn to ribbons by Jeonma with his eyes flashing white. It was a battle unlike any other, with the youth flashing between the beasts as he tore them apart. All of the screaming and roars of pain looked like it had taken place in just a split second. The bulls roared their rage and Ma hesitated when one got a bit too close. He raised his knives to block the attack, shielding his face from any real harm. The other two in the back were alarmed to see him cornered, and many buffalo raced at him, intending to take him down while he was distracted and alone. They piled together, leaping on each other as their only aim was to crush him. The buffaloes were mad with bloodlust and they created a thick muscular pile, determined to drown him underneath their weight. Saki panicked to see such an attack and she drew her bow, feeling the number of attacks were too much for Ma to handle on his own. However, before she could even fire her bow, her eyes widened in shock to see a spray of gore. Muscles were torn apart and the enemies before her scattered into a million pieces before their knife-wielding leader. He had torn those buffalo to shreds without even breaking a sweat, and he even looked mildly irritated that he'd had to face them at all. The girl could not help but gasp in a silent prayer of disbelief. She had not realized that they were led by such a monster. Their enemies fell around the area in many pieces, and their conqueror stood over them, valiant and strong. His blades glowed in the darkness and a dark red aura bubbled around him thanks to the crazy feat that he had accomplished. Ma stared down at the fallen bodies and was busy thinking that he'd gathered all of the materials that he would need. He figured that this number of enemies should do nicely, and he happily scooped up all the horns that he could carry. Thanks to the 40-second painless blessing, he could take down 50 buffalo like it was a breeze. It was a huge blessing, which was about time since his power had felt like a curse for too long. His #1 fan, Chloe, was at his side in seconds, happily hailing him and telling him that he had crushed it again that day. Of course, he recognized that he had come this far thanks to the party's help. He smiled and told Chloe that she had done a good job and that they had a clean run. The girl was ecstatic with joy at this compliment, of course. The two classmates were happily babbling as if they were not surrounded by a flood of blood, while the other two normal people gaped at them. The brunette was in awe as she watched the other two discuss. The orange-haired boy beamed at Saki and grinned that he had told her that no surprises could hold them down. The brunette still yelled, asking how she was not supposed to freak out over that. The orange-haired kid grinned and laughed that she was speechless. Of course, the healer had expected that their leader would always find a way to shock them. The archer was still baffled and looked at their leader with confusion, wondering aloud what the boy even was. She didn't think he was normal, and to be frank, neither did Weapon. However, he also had no idea what their leader was. Weapon grinned, thinking that their guy was legendary and wondered if Ma would mind about live streaming. The public would not care much. Saki was confused and did not understand what he was talking about. The healer said their leader's name with awe and the brunette was still speechless and confused. She had no idea what was going on. The four continued through the dungeon. They had achieved their aim, so it was now time to casually stroll their way back home. The dungeon's clear condition was 20 buffalo, but their leader had managed to solo twice of that just to show off. Ma said it didn't matter since he didn't do anything during midterms anyway. The healer grinned and seemed like he wanted to say a few other things to the leader, but he glanced at Saki and suddenly changed his mind. Honestly, they had almost died screaming back there, and the healer jokingly said that the Lion King had almost died the same way. The archer was confused that they had suddenly brought up the Lion King. Then he asked if their leader was being controlled by something else too. Suddenly, Chloe asked their leader why everything had suddenly gone so quiet. It was eerie, and the more they walked, the more it felt like something was off. The pillar-looking thing was suspicious. Suddenly, the archer screamed that they should wait. They all paused when they saw huge dark purple chains hanging from the dungeon gate. They looked deadly as heck and the students stared at them in alarm. It was a gate and the team stared at it in shock. It was chained shut. That was very unusual and it sent chills through the main character. Inside the dungeon, the traitor guard at the gate found the slaughtered bodies of the buffalo that he had unleashed on the children. He could not believe that they had actually managed to defeat the foes that he thought they would die facing. They had actually killed all of the beasts, and the man gulped in fright just seeing that. It was insane. There was 20 billion in debt from Chiorwan land. A few days ago, some woman claiming to be a Hawakan instructor approached the guard. It was the traitor demoness teacher with the purple hair highlights, and she had asked the man to do one thing for her and she would wipe his debt clean. The guard was shocked at this offer. The woman's request was for the guard to tame the buffalo, and then he was to frenzy them with the demon stone that she handed to him. After that, he was to release the frenzied bulls as soon as Kang Ma showed up. Then he would open the stone gate in the depths. There were a lot of rules, and the guard couldn't tell if he was more shocked by her outfit, or that she'd shown up out of nowhere with a grocery list of requests with an unbelievable offer. The guard could not believe that the witch was sacrificing students. Not happy with being judged, the woman asked if he was uninterested. She was fine with that since she also hated risky bets, and she was fine with just finding someone else who would do the job for her. Unfortunately for the guard, he was desperate and he grabbed her hand in a plea for her not to go. He beamed and said that he would gladly do it and he was happy to help. The woman smirked and said he was doing well for a debt-ridden fool, insulting the poor guy even after he accepted the job. She said that she would call soon and his job was to answer every unknown number. The poor idiot was drooling with joy. His mind only focused on his gambling debts getting eliminated, like he wouldn't end up gambling himself into another hole. Unperturbed, the lady wished him goodbye and he stared at her with surprise and awe. Then he grinned at the offer of 20 billion. He could do so much with that money, and already the idiot was planning on gambling again because fools never change. The man stalked through the dungeon in anger, cursing anything that would get in the way of his 20 billion. He had already planned out how he was going to spend it. Anyway, he had no reason to worry because the stone gates were open and he was sure that there was no way that they would survive what they found inside. Meanwhile, the students found themselves facing that exact gateway. They could not believe it and they wondered if they had entered the stone gate now. Ma looked around and figured it explained why everything had seemed so easy. They had walked right into a trap. That glare from the guard should have been his tip because it had felt very wrong. The main character should have trusted his gut feeling back then. This gate would only open with the giant's demon stone, and that was a mid-game quest item. Those fragments they had seen earlier were pieces of the giant's mana stone, and the boy had not expected the door to be left open. If he followed the game, then the reward for defeating this level would be pretty good. However, surviving came first. Ma could see it as he stared at the heavy door before them that was locked with even heavier chains. A single red lion was carved into the supposedly indestructible stone gate. The boy has used all of the 40 seconds of painless blessings while fighting the buffalo, but he hoped Murasama would hold out a little longer. He had to slash the gate and get out before it shattered. That was the plan. A bubbling of purple miasma began before them, with smoke seeping from the ground, and the students tensed in alarm. The little assassin called out to their leader and asked what was going on. The team was confused as they did not understand the things around them, but the air felt very dangerous. The rumbling continued and suddenly something manifested before them from the haze of white light. A giant being with an axe had appeared and it towered over them by many feet. The students could not comprehend what they were looking at, and the healer dumbly asked if that was a buffalo. Of course, the creature was no buffalo, and Ma cursed their luck as he regarded the beast before them. The tall menacing creature that stood many feet above them had broken through from the gate before they had gotten the chance to escape. The clear reward was the blessing of transition. The reward would transfer and amplify the owner's blessing to a chosen target, and it was single use only. In order to somehow gain that blessing, they needed to defeat the Agrade demon, Inatoros Minotauros, also known as the Buffalo King. The wind blew fiercely in the darkness of the cave, bringing with it the aura of the mad, powerful beast that stood before them. It was a large, towering creature with curving black horns, lit up by the light of the fiery torch. The creature looked left and right as the torches came alight. Two bodyguards stood at the side of the powerful creature that towered high over the 4 tiny students that faced it. This was a boss-level demon that they were never supposed to fight. The left-wing tactical formation and the right-wing tactical formation were already in place. Chloe assessed that they were now facing a demonic beast inside the stone gate. Even those 2 smaller foes were a problem. Even if the team tried to slash the gate and escape, once the bigger beast awoke, it would be impossible to escape unscathed. However, this situation was not like the midterms. Ma knew nothing about the mermaid, but he had fought minotaurs before. He could take 3 alone at full strength, but he had used all 40 seconds of the painless blessing. Any battle he fought now would be near suicide. The team needed to act strategically, and he reached inside his jacket for his hidden sashimi knife. The main character asked the healer if he could boost him with some pain reduction. The Carrot Top was surprised but said that he could. Then the main guy needed to know how long he could do that. Weapon could only give Ma 2 minutes max, but that was enough. He asked the healer to keep it active while he was fighting. One slip and he would be cooked for sure. The healer was a little nervous, but he was also motivated by Ma's smile. He said he would do it just because his hero was the one asking. Saki and Chloe were to handle the small fries. The big one was the main characters to deal with, and he told them not to interfere. The Japanese archer was stunned by how quickly Ma had adapted to a difficult situation. The boy asked them all to stick to the plan, and just then, the beast roared, spraying spit all over the place. He was like a wild beast. With a focused, grim expression, the dark-haired student unsheathed his weapon and activated the blessing of the sword god. The pain was brutalizing as it flooded his body with silver-blue power. Ma had not faced the realities of his curse for a long time, and it was a brain-bending experience. To feel like 1,000 knives flooded through his veins, trying to uproot his nervous system, the young student spat blood in pain. However, he suddenly felt a bomb soothing the effects. He could move. Weapon was playing his recorder for all he was worth. The healer's blessing had helped after all. Ma had to do this, even with blood seeping from his lips. He needed to move. They would only get one shot at this. The giant beast with golden horns made a run for the young sashimi wielder, and the main character rushed at him with speed. The god's blessing stayed with him, blessing him as he charged his opponent. The fires in the underground burned as the students fought for their lives. Moving fast like the wind, Ma rushed forward and ran straight for his opponent's leg. The blessing of the sword god was so painful that he was about to vomit blood. However, he managed to stay standing as the giant beast unleashed its first slash. The deadly sweep of its sword managed to miss Ma, and he dodged the first and then the second attack. He had to block the next kick that the Minotaur shot in his direction. But he had no time to stop and contemplate injuries. The MC moved fast, there was a slash, and he had to pull back after making his first cut. Even the sensation she could not feel with the painless blessings was starting to awaken within him. He faced the giant warrior, and the beast hefted its giant sword. Ma rushed forward, diving in between the beast's legs. Its red eyes followed his movement, turning in its enraged bid to strike down its opponent. The boy growled and sliced, but the beast moved in counterattack, its blade inches away from the main character's face. Even with the pain bearing down on him with heavy malicious intent, the dark-haired boy realized that he felt free. He raced forward, moving like the wind as his opponent bore down on him with the intent to kill. The giant beast wrecked the landscape each time he swung his sword. He was a powerful creature, a foe worth facing the mighty protagonist. The beast's pectorals bulged as it raised its weapon again. The Oreo-haired boy breathed in the wind. The beast's strike came down like the thunderous clap of lightning and thunder. It burned as it descended, searing anything that dared to stand in his way. Smoke came over the wrecked scene, blocking everything from sight. The beast stood proud in the cloud of its destruction, searching for signs of his opponent's survival. It grinned in malicious victory, red eyes glowing with joy, but paused when it sensed something. A flaw in its attack. Ma stood before it, his eyes glowing blue, sashimi knife still in hand. Saki glanced back at the battle happening behind them, thinking it was crazy that a human could even move like that. The small fries they were handling were basically the beast's generals, and the archer leapt into the air with her bow in hand. Muscle control, stance, leveraging kinetic energy, a combat sense that broke the enemy's gentle gravity with minimal movement. But theory and reality were worlds apart. The archer knew that as she fired her bow, the beast screamed as it was hit by her steady arrow that was fired with unshakable focus even at death's door. This sort of fighting really reminded the brunette of someone. She growled for the annoying beast to get out of her way, and she fired her golden arrow. The bolt charged with energy shot forward, tearing into the beast and bringing it down. Yes, Saki realized that Ma reminded her of Siegfried the Sword Emperor. The current rumor going around the school was that the Sword Emperor used his aura against a special admission student. The giant beast now faced that special admission student. Its eyes widened in shock and horror as it stared down Ma. Ma faced that gaze without any wavering, a dark terrifying blue aura burning behind him, alerting even the towering beast to the danger that stood before it. It still fought on, swinging a fist at the boy's face with the intention to catch him by surprise. In a bright blinding light, Ma swung his sashimi knife, cutting the beast before him to ribbons. He grinned wickedly, eyes bright with a dangerous light as the beast's arm dropped, severed from its body. The monster cried out in pain. Its giant arm had been severed and its opponent walked calmly behind him. What had first appeared as an uneven fight had quickly become a beatdown for the giant beast. As the dark-haired boy fought, the others fought beside him, weapon playing his recorder for all he was worth, while the girls handled the two smaller bulls. The orange-haired boy was strained and shaky, but he kept up his steady pace as Chloe absolutely murdered the beast before her. The bull crumpled to the flood and the redhead flicked her sword to get the blood stains off. With an even pace, she stalked back to the healer, rubbing the blood off her cheeks. It had been a close fight, but she was still majorly inexperienced when it came to fighting demonoids. The more human-like the monster was, the more deadlier it was to face. That's why the fishmen could not compare to the bulls they'd been facing. It may vary from person to person, but if a demon acts like a human to that extent, then the redhead worried that her crush would struggle. The giant beast screamed in pain and rage at being cut by the small student, and it gripped its large weapon with its other hand. It hoisted up the battle axe with a roar of battle, casting a dark aura around it. The students were shocked and horrified to see a demonoid with the ability to cast magic. Its veins throbbed in its arm and it gritted its teeth with madness and power. The archer began to sweat as she realized that the creature was burning life force for mana. She could not believe that a demonoid could do something like that. The wind blasted all of them as they watched their impossible opponent stand before them fearlessly and do something that they should not have been able to do. It was hard to even approach because of the rampant magic power, yet even now, King Ma did not back down. Blood began to leak from the healer's lips, but he remembered the instruction not to waver and he kept playing, hoping for a miracle. The orange-haired boy believed in his hero, and the dark-haired boy stared facing the giant bull before him. Even the main character spat blood, looking up in horror to see his opponent beef up in brawn and magic. The situation was tense with little chance of them slipping away. The beast then once again swung and he swung his axe with all of his might. That swing came with fire and vengeance and rage, burning light sparkling as he swept his arm through the air towards Ma who stood beneath him. The Minotaur's axe bubbled with dark magic. That magic stretched from its arms, veins growing around the axe before him. It was empowered by the beast's drive to end Ma once and for all, its hatred fueling its power. The main character spilt blood from his lips, staring in horror at the beefed-up opponent he faced. The air was thick and tense with blood and sweat, and the dark aura of hate as the beast swung its weapon towards the MC, the dark-haired boy standing in the way of the attack. Pulling forth his weapon, the Oreo-haired boy leapt forward and there was a splash of blood, a blinding light and a tremor through the area as both their attacks met. The axe hand versus the glowing sashimi knife. The beast's rage versus the student's will to survive and live. They faced each other, knowing a death match stood before them and only one of them would survive. Ma naturally pressed on because to accept defeat would not only kill him, but all the members of his team as well. The magic was too dense and the boy laughed as he realized he could not cut through the Minotaur's magic defense. If the main character was to dodge now, the students behind him would become the victims. The monster growled as it pushed its attack against Ma, and the boy began to bend to the weight of the power pushing against him. Golden cracks appeared in the air and the gifted student groaned in pain. His feet scraped across the hard ground and he realized he was getting pushed back. This was not an easy battle to win and he had already started to lose. He could not accept that. However, before he could come up with a solution, a golden bolt fired from behind him, nailing the beast in the eye. The MC was shocked to receive an assist. He turned and saw the blue archer, her hair sailing in the wind she'd created with her shot. The girl yelled, asking the Oreo-haired youth what he was waiting for now. He was to take the opportunity that she had opened and sliced. Realizing this, Ma rushed forward with his sword in hand. The beast growled in rage to see the boy get an assist. The dark-haired boy closed his eyes and focused his power. His eyes grew dark with dangerous thorns, a red light glinting in his eyes. Red light danced around the boy in the darkness as yet another aspect of his blessing was activated. There was red on the ground and it was deep and treacherous, painting the scenery with a dark and dangerous foreboding color. The red was like a living, breathing creature and from it something white extended. The red beat like a thumping heart and the white within it grew, forming the pointed end of a dangerous weapon streaked with white and metal and red. A red dangerous aura was coming for Ma and the dark-haired boy pulled out his long blue knife. It was a blue light that Chloe recognized, and she stared in surprise. The blue light met the red, piercing through, and it would cut cleanly. Ma, his eyes blacked out with white irises. The monster's eyes widened in shock as the blue light began to cut. The light grew blinding as the MC forged forward and the monster screamed in rage and pain as it was cut, this time more cleanly than before. It was like its cord of life was severed as Ma pushed forward. The special student swung his arm and sliced that monster in half. The beast fell apart in two separate halves and Ma tumbled in the air. The Minotaur fell in two separate halves, the upper and the lower. The beast's attack had not even come close to the perfect slide that the dark-haired boy had made. The others stared in shock at such a beautiful cut. The boy stumbled forward and the beast's pieces fell to the floor. Ma stood still for a moment, his back bent as he stood between the two bloody pieces. He still gripped the knife in his hand and he breathed heavily, gasping in giant breaths. The dark-haired boy stared forward in relief, blood caking his lips as he embraced the satisfaction of victory. He had managed to cut his foe down. Saki stared in awe, her eyes staring at Ma. Meanwhile, a blue countdown continued. The healer fell to the ground in relief and he stared in amazement. His hero shattered common sense every time the healer watched him fight. The blue light that had been bright enough to illuminate the cave had come from Manhwa, who was somehow still standing. At his age, the dark-haired genius was already manifesting an aura. The orange-haired boy wondered what the boy even was. The healer jumped in shock when Saki placed a hand on his shoulder, scolding her friend and reminding him to breathe. He was still jumpy from their terrifying experience, and the boy looked up at her in surprise. The girl smirked and said that she kind of understood what weapon had meant earlier. The boy was confused, and the brunette explained that she meant the legendary incident. The orange-haired boy was surprised that she was bringing that up. Sake smiled as she finally understood why weapon kept following that guy around. Manhwa was pretty impressive. The healer protested that he was doing nothing of the sort, but she just rolled her eyes, saying that the academy rules would not let Kang Manhwa transfer to their class that year. The healer's lips were swollen and purple, and he stared at his friend in disbelief, asking if she hit her head or got possessed by a demon. The girl just smirked and suggested the other way around. There was, after all, no rule against that one. Now that the healer considered it, he realized there was no rule against it. The brunette smiled and said that was good, because now she felt like tagging along with him too. Kang Manhwa had become someone interesting to them. Meanwhile, the boy in question was really going through it as he tried to catch his breath. Even with Speed Weapon's blessing, rest was unavoidable. At least the main character had managed to survive. Still, fighting without the painless blessing was progress, and this was the first time he'd done it. Suddenly, someone cried out his name and flung themselves at him. It was Chloe, of course, and his resident Yander was worried about him. She wrapped her arms around him, much to his surprise, as she wailed and asked if he was hurt anywhere and if he was okay. All of her care and hugs were somehow aggravating his already existing wounds, and he trembled in her arms, groaning about how he was still hurt and he would love for her to wait a minute. The girl gasped and pulled back, nervously playing with her hair as she apologized. The poor boy leaned back as he wished he'd just died instead. The pain he felt now was massive. The boy then blinked as he stared up into the sky and saw a huge system notification. It congratulated the MC, for he had unlocked yet another blessing. Originally, this fight should have been Leon's. The MC had no intention to steal it, especially as the spirit rank was one of the rarest in that world. It was a blessing that only revealed its full potential when combined with another. Manhwa had gained the blessing of transition, which meant that he could transfer an own blessing to a living being or an object. However, the user must make direct physical contact with the target. It was an essential blessing for controlling the dual-natured Bama. Well, the dark-haired boy had won it now, so he might as well make the best of this. Suddenly, the door to the dungeon opened and the weakened student raised his head. The dark-haired boy reminded Chloe that he had asked for a favor. The girl was surprised, but she immediately agreed to whatever favor he required. The guard peeked inside the dungeon, looking around. He then assessed the situation and stared in horrified disbelief. The poor stupefied guard could not believe the wreckage that lay before his eyes, but before he could process it, Chloe leapt at him and stabbed him in the leg. The guard screamed in pain, crying and wiggling on the floor like a pathetic caterpillar. The assassin warned him to stay still. Her gaze was threatening, and the guard cried in fear to see her. Weapon was a bit confused and asked what was going on, so the team lead explained that he had asked the girl to do him a favor earlier. The guard yelled and cursed at the students, asking why they were attacking him and what he had done to them. The dark-haired boy said that was exactly what they were trying to figure out. After a moment of explanation, the guards were shocked that the rampaging buffalo horde and the open stone gate were all because of the wicked guard. The archer admitted that it had all felt a bit suspicious. There were not any surveillance cameras inside the dungeon, but the guard had just happened to show up in time. Just as they defeated the beast. The healer did not understand why the guard would target them though. The archer scoffed and said that was exactly what they were still trying to figure out. Then, they turned to the guard. There was no way that a small fry like him pulled this off without any outside help. The brunette asked with glowing blue eyes, asking who was backing him. The man was already very terrified. He stuttered as he tried to speak, but the brunette was impatient and asked if he would talk or if he would prefer that they loosen his tongue. Even Manhwa was surprised at her ferociousness. Then, the dark-haired boy added that if the guard would not tell them about his boss, things would get very dark indeed. The guard panicked and said he would talk. A few days ago, a Hawakan Academy instructor came to him, and they said that they would clear his gambling debt if he just obeyed their instructions. Weapon was enraged to hear that a guard was selling out students for gambling debts, and that he had traded over lives for a few bucks. Even Saki couldn't believe his scummery. The guard panicked and said that it wasn't a few bucks, the person had promised 20 billion. The guard refused at first, but Weapon didn't want to hear it. He thought that the guard was a complete scumbag. Anyway, Saki made Weapon calm down, and then asked the guard what the instructor looked like. The man confessed that it was a woman with purple hair and eyes, and she was pretty tall as well. The archer considered this description and realized that it sounded like the class assistant instructor. She was sure because she never forgot a face. Plus, the teacher's eyes were so sharp that she stood out. Manhwa mumbled that this was true. The healer was confused and asked if she was behind the midterms incident as well. The brunette asked what had happened during the midterms since she had not been on the team back then. The dark-haired boy then took the moment to reveal that they had run into a demonoid mermaid during the midterms. The brunette was shocked to hear this, realizing that Leon had ended up in a hospital because he fought a demon. Weapon was glad that they could talk about that now, because he was thrilled to reveal that Manhwa had been the one to solo the giant female fish. Of course, the archer was shocked to hear this. She was about to protest, but given current events, it made sense. Well, they had gotten all the info that they needed from the guard, and the boy checked out the time on his cell phone device. The others gasped and groaned when they realized how late it had gotten. They had spent more time in the dungeon than they had expected. Suddenly there was a tearing sound and blood splashed everywhere. The guard screamed in pain and fear as blood formed on his clothes. A dungeon that was never supposed to open just happened to open. The timing was perfect for erasing someone from existence. The guard panicked and asked what the student meant by that. The dark-haired boy instead turned to his classmate. She was the assassin here, so it was her call. The girl nodded and stepped forward, raising her sword. The sword was pointed at the greedy wicked guard who begged for mercy, but mercy was forfeit when he tried to get them brutally murdered. The guard wished they were joking, but Chloe was going to execute him. He wasn't granted much time to scream as Chloe was done quickly. Hoken Academy's elders and instructors, one of them was targeting Ma. The boy already had enough trouble on his neck, but now he was enraged. He mentally told the teacher to come at him because he would erase them all. Damn, not gonna lie, the action is kind of peaking in this comic. It's just one combat panel after another, and I'm loving everything about it. Let me know which characters you've been rooting for in this story, and I'll see you all in the next upload.
If you came this far, please like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel.